Chapter 124. Eldest martial sister, what should we do? Luo Fengxue asked anxiously. Han Xingyu didn't say anything, but her expression was very calm. She looked at Wei Jiaxi, who was lying on the bed, and made a decision. Wake second martial sister up first. Luo Fengxue nodded repeatedly. Upon guessing the demonic beast's movements, Mo Tiange became anxious. Han Xingyu's decision suited her temperament. Tiange, come and help. Han Xingyu and Luo Fengxue helped Wei Jiaxi up from the bed. Han Xingyu raised her head and said, Tiange, your cultivation level is also in the middle stage of the foundation building realm now. In a moment, let's pour our spiritual power into second junior martial sister's Dantian and Sea of Knowledge to wake her primordial spirit. I understand. Mo Tiange nodded. She and Han Xingyu sat behind Wei Jiaxi and listened to her orders. I'll count to 3. Pour your spiritual energy into her Lingtai acupoint. In the beginning, the spiritual energy in her body will automatically resist. You have to hold on. I'll lend you a hand if I can free up my hands. All right. Now, 1, 2, 3. Right after she finished speaking, Mo Tiange immediately raised her hand, condensed her aura into her palm, and placed it on the Lingtai acupoint on Wei Jiaxi's back. However, Han Xingyu directly pressed on her Baihui acupoint. Fengxue, look after your second senior sister. If she can't hold on any longer, feed her a vitality pill. Yes, eldest senior sister. Mo Tiange's spiritual aura had a purine attribute, it was ice-cold and light. After entering Wei Jiaxi's body through Lingtai acupoint, Mo Tiange immediately sensed that her spiritual aura was rebounded by Wei Jiaxi's meridians. This force was much stronger than hers. In fact, although the foundation building stage was classified differently from the qi condensation stage, which was generally divided into early stage, mid-stage, and late stage, these 3 minor stages were also divided into 9 levels. Levels 1, 2, 3 were early stage foundation building, 4, 5, 6 were mid-stage foundation building, and 7, 8, 9 were late-stage foundation building. The so-called completion of the foundational building stage was the 10th level, a step away from the core formation stage. Right now, Luo Fengxue had just advanced to the foundation building realm, so she was still in the first layer. Han Xingyu had also entered the late stage of the foundation building realm not too long ago, so she was still in the 7th layer. As for Mo Tiange and Wei Jiaxi, although they were both in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, Wei Jiaxi had been in the foundation building realm for almost 100 years. Although she was still in the middle stage, she was already in the 6th layer. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, had just broken through and was only in the 4th layer. For qi condensation cultivators, a gap of 2 levels was already enough to affect their strength, let alone foundation establishment cultivators. Once Mo Tiange's spiritual aura entered Wei Jiaxi's meridians, the rebounding pressure made her frown. However, in the next moment, she activated the spirit concealing pendant. This spirit concealing pendant originally had the function of concealing one's constitution and gathering spiritual aura. The effect of gathering spiritual aura could make the wearer's spells more refined. After Zhong Muling refined it again, this effect became even more obvious. A wisp of pure spiritual aura flowed out of the spirit concealing pendant. Mo Tiange immediately felt the pressure on her lesson. In addition, her spiritual aura had the attribute of pure yin, so it was both soft and tough. Very soon, her spiritual aura deftly neutralized Wei Jiaxi's rebound force and advanced along her meridians towards her Dantian. Han Xingyu looked at her in astonishment. She originally wanted to help Mo Tiange later, but she didn't expect Mo Tiange to break free on her own. However, thinking that this junior martial sister of hers had a lot of fated chances, Han Xingyu figured there might be something special about her spiritual aura, so she didn't say anything and focused on slowly guiding her spiritual aura downwards. Before long, Mo Tiange's and Han Xingyu's spiritual auras converged in her Dantian. Soon after, this combined spiritual aura flowed along the special passage between her Dantian and her Sea of Knowledge, entering her Sea of Knowledge. For a moment, the two of them both had pained expressions on their faces, making Luo Fengxue extremely nervous. Mo Tiange indeed felt an enormous pressure in her sea of knowledge. The sea of knowledge was the dwelling place of primordial spirits and was very far away from her Dantian. However, her Dantian was the only place connected to her sea of knowledge. If she wanted to enter her sea of knowledge, she had to go through her Dantian, where her spiritual aura was stored. The spiritual pressure in her Dantian didn't make her and Han Qingyu feel too uncomfortable. However, after entering the narrow passage in her sea of knowledge, the two of them felt that they couldn't exert any strength, so they could only slowly move forward bit by bit. Finally, the spiritual aura entered the boundless sea of knowledge. The two of them heaved sighs of relief as they found Wei Jiaxi's sleeping primordial spirit. You must be careful. Ordinary cultivators' primordial spirits are very fragile. Even this kind of weak spiritual aura can still cause pain to the divine sense. Let's wrap up her primordial spirit first, then I'll slowly apply pressure on it. Yes, Senior Martial Sister Han. Mo Tiange steadily controlled her spiritual aura, listening to Han Qingyu's instructions. With the help of the spirit-concealing pendant, Mo Tiange's ability to control spiritual aura was also very subtle. She gently spread her spiritual aura and spread it over Wei Jiaxi's primordial spirit, then stopped moving. Han Qingyu, on the other hand, was much more cautious. After a series of complicated manipulations, Wei Jiaxi's eyelashes fluttered and a pained expression appeared on her face. Fengxue, spirit-nourishing pills. Luo Fengxue immediately took out spirit-nourishing pills and fed them to Wei Jiaxi. Wei Jiaxi's primordial spirit immediately stabilized. Soon after, she opened her eyes. Second Junior Martial Sister, don't move. Wait until we extract the spiritual aura from your meridians, then you can use it. Upon hearing Han Qingyu's shout, Wei Jiaxi was startled for a moment, but she immediately did as she was told. Mo Tiange and Han Qingyu spent a lot of effort to extract the spiritual aura from Wei Jiaxi's meridians. The loss of this spiritual aura didn't really matter to them, but the sea of knowledge was a very fragile place. If they were careless and left spiritual aura inside, Wei Jiaxi would definitely be in trouble. Phew. This was the first time Mo Tiange used spiritual aura to do such a meticulous thing, so she felt extremely tired. Luo Fengxue hastily helped her down and fed her some medicinal pills. She then went back to Wei Jiaxi and asked, Second Senior Martial Sister, are you all right? Wei Jiaxi opened her eyes. She seemed to be a bit confused. What happened? Han Qingyu said gently, Second Junior Martial Sister, you and Tiange ran into an accident. You were bewitched by an illusory formation, but you're all right now. Don't think too much about it. Take a rest first. I'll tell you about it later. Wei Jiaxi didn't say anything. She lowered her head and seemed to be in a daze, seemingly trying to recall something. Second Senior Martial Sister? Luo Fengxue was a bit worried. After a long time, Wei Jiaxi finally regained her composure. She shook her head and said, I'm all right. Rest assured. How's the situation now? Han Qingyu smiled and said, I'm here, so what are you worried about? Second Junior Martial Sister, rest well. I'll tell you in detail when you're spirited again. Wei Jiaxi's expression changed, but in the end, she still nodded. This made Han Qingyu and Luo Fengxue feel relieved. They stood up and said, in that case, you rest first. We won't disturb you any longer. Wait. Wei Jiaxi raised her head. Her gaze swept over Mo Tiange's body. Tiange, I want to talk to you. Mo Tiange was stunned. She looked at Han Qingyu and Luo Fengxue. Luo Fengxue's brows were tightly knitted. Han Qingyu, on the other hand, was silent for a moment. She then gave Mo Tiange a meaningful glance and said with a smile, Tiange, since you don't have anything else to do, you can keep your Senior Martial Sister Wei company for now. Mo Tiange nodded and said, I understand, Senior Martial Sister Han. After Han Qingyu and Luo Fengxue left, Mo Tiange walked towards Wei Jiaxi. She tidied up the bed, then helped Wei Jessie sit up. Senior Marshal Sister Wei, do you have anything to tell me? Wei Jessie remained silent, but her gaze never left Imo Tiange. Her gaze seemed to be scrutinizing and considering Imo Tiange. Imo Tiange stopped and sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Han Xingyu wanted Imo Tiange to be a bit more patient. After all, Wei Jessie had always been like this. Moreover, she was currently injured. Imo Tiange didn't care about this, so she agreed with Han Xingyu. Now that Wei Jessie was looking at her like this, she didn't feel displeased at all. Imo Tiange had a rough childhood and was accustomed to the fickleness of the world. How could she take these things seriously? After a long time, Wei Jessie finally spoke. Tiange, do you know why I asked you to stay? Her tone was actually very calm. Imo Tiange calmed down. The corners of her lips curled up into a faint smile. I don't know. Wei Jessie closed her eyes. No one knew what she was thinking. After a long time, she opened her eyes again and continued to speak calmly. I remember that I did something bad to you in the illusion, so I think I have the responsibility to explain it to you. Senior Marshal's sister doesn't have to do this. Imo Tiange didn't want to hear those words. Senior Marshal's sister doesn't owe me anything, and you've never wronged me. You were just influenced by the illusion. What's there to explain? No. Wei Jessie stared at her resolutely. Her gaze was stubborn. Although my character isn't good and I'm unsociable and arrogant, I've never bullied or humiliated others. If I don't explain it clearly, I'll feel bad. Imo Tiange was silent for a while. She felt powerless in her heart. What happened between her and Wei Jessie was actually Wei Jessie's own feelings. In fact, it had nothing to do with Imo Tiange, but now, Imo Tiange sighed. Alright, I'll listen to whatever Senior Marshal Sister Wei wants to say. After obtaining Imo Tiange's agreement, Wei Jessie's gaze softened and she showed a rare smile. She was actually a beautiful woman. Her eyebrows were elegant, and her face was like spring. If she smiled often, she would definitely be very amiable and cute. After thinking for a while, Wei Jessie said softly, Tiange, you should know that I don't like you. I don't know whether you know the reason or not. In our Clear Spring Peak, Grandmaster was a genius. Aside from the deceased martial uncle Qingyuan, he had a total of 6 advanced inner disciples. Our master ranked first, was the oldest, and also had the most disciples. More than 100 years ago, Master was still very young, and he only had 6 or 7 disciples. Among them, the only female disciples were me and eldest martial sister. Although the inner disciples of us core formation cultivators all had double spiritual roots, there were good and bad ones. Among them, I had the best aptitude, so my cultivation progressed very quickly. Often, even my senior martial brothers couldn't catch up to me. It could be said that I was the number 1 disciple among the 3rd generation of Grandmaster's disciples. Just like that, over time, I gradually developed a sense of pride. Martial Uncle Shoujing came before I entered the sect. In fact, his age was similar to us 3rd generation disciples. Because my aptitude was excellent, I was accepted into the sect when I was a child. When I entered the sect, he seemed to have just built his foundation. At that time, I only knew that Grandmaster had an advanced inner disciple who was related to him by blood. His aptitude was quite high, and his temperament was even better. However, I didn't take Martial Uncle seriously because I thought I would definitely surpass him, just like how I surpassed my senior martial brothers one by one. But I never expected that not only would I never be able to achieve this goal, but I would also be left further and further behind. Martial Uncle built his foundation when he was 20 years old. At that time, Martial Uncle Lingxi of Sweet Dew Peak had already built his foundation when he was 17 years old, so he didn't attract any attention. I also thought that for elite disciples with high aptitudes like us, building our foundation was a relatively easy threshold to cross. Building it at around 20 years old only meant that we were quite lucky. But I never expected that on the first day I saw Martial Uncle. Imo Tiange was silent as she listened to Wei Jessie's sometimes sweet and sometimes painful recollection. She felt empty in her heart. She couldn't even hear Wei Jesse's voice clearly. What was the point of telling her all this? Should she rejoice or sigh for it? Tiange, I'm very sorry. I thought I controlled my emotions very well, but in the illusory formation, I exposed myself and even had thoughts of hurting people. Feng Shui was right. I walked further and further down this path, and I couldn't control myself anymore. Because Martial Uncle was good to you, although I tried my best to suppress it, my heart still felt unfair. In fact, after I fainted, I was still conscious. I thought about it for a very, very long time. I know that if I want to achieve anything on the path of cultivation, I must give it up. But I tried again and again, and when I wanted to give it up, I felt like I was even going to give up my own heart. So, I thought it through, I don't care anymore. If I can't get it, then I won't ask for it. If I can't give it up, then I won't give it up. Right now, I'm about 100 years old, just a hair's breadth away from the late stage of the foundation establishment realm. If I don't form my core, I'll probably have about 200 years left in my lifespan. In 200 years, Uncle Master might not be able to form his nascent soul. With Martial Uncle's temperament, if he doesn't succeed in his cultivation, he definitely won't be trapped by his emotions. By the time he decides to dual cultivate, I'm afraid I'll already be long gone. At this point, Wei Jiasi smiled at Mo Tiange. Her gaze was filled with sorrow and determination. She said, that being the case, what should I be afraid of? Let it be like this for the rest of my life. I won't force it, I won't force it. If I can get it, I'll get it. If I can't let it go, I won't let it go. Whether it's foundation establishment or core formation, it's up to fate. Mo Tiange remained silent. This was the best attitude Wei Jiasi had ever shown her, but Mo Tiange couldn't force out a smile. Because Mo Tiange clearly felt the sorrow behind Wei Jiasi's words. This senior martial sister Wei, no matter who it was, she was such a proud person, yet now, she was willing to give up her future. But from another point of view, wasn't this also a sign that she'd come to terms with it? This is my love alone. Even if the person I love has nothing to do with it. I'll guard him alone. If I can't get him, I don't care what the consequences will be. Tiange, Martial Uncle, he. Senior Martial Sister Wei, Mo Tiange suddenly interrupted Wei Jiasi, I think you don't need to tell me this. What happens to Martial Uncle has nothing to do with me. Wei Jiasi was also silent, but in the next moment, she chuckled softly and said, yes, I was confused. Alright, Tiange, please forgive me for what happened in the past. From now on, whether it has nothing to do with you or not, it's all my business, it has nothing to do with you. Wei Jiasi woke up. Han Xingyu spent some effort to help her recover her strength and finally told her what happened. Wei Jiasi was silent for a long time. Sure enough, she gave the answer they expected, this must be a conspiracy. Now, Danding School had many of their martial brothers and their master. Luo Fengxue was very anxious. She shouted, then what should we do now? Han Xingyu pondered for a moment and said, it's useless to be anxious now. We've already been delayed here for a while. If they wanted to set up something, they've probably already done it. As for summoning talismans, I've tried, but I don't know whether Master has received it or not. This place was quite far from Danding School. Ordinary summoning talismans couldn't be used unless they used 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talismans or 10,000-mile sound-transmitting talismans. The talisman Han Xingyu used to report this matter to Master Daoist Xianyin was none other than the 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talisman. However, it was highly likely that it was blocked by a great defensive formation. Is there any news from you clan? Wei Jiasi asked. No. Han Xingyu shook her head. I mentioned it to them, but they don't know what's going on. Clan Master Yu also tried to send a message to the school, but I don't know if he can do it or not. The four of them once again sank into silence. Right now, it was definitely too late for them to return to Danding School. They couldn't even guarantee their safety. Once a war broke out, it would already be great if they could rely on Clan's terrain and formations to stay alive. If they left without permission and the demonic beasts ran rampant outside, perhaps, senior martial sisters, I'm afraid we don't have any other choice but to wait. After thinking for a long time, Mo Tienga said slowly, we're only 4 foundation building cultivators. There's a nascent soul cultivator in Danding School. Even if we fall into their trap, I'm afraid it won't be easy to attack. Martial Uncle Xianin and the other martial brothers are guests in Danding School, so it shouldn't be too dangerous. On the other hand, it's hard to say for us. Clan only has several foundation building cultivators, and their cultivation levels aren't as high as ours. Relying on them definitely won't work. Han Xingyu pondered for a long time before she finally nodded. Tienga's right. If those demonic beasts can't defeat Danding School in a fierce battle and change their target, we'll be in danger. Then what should we do? Luo Fengxue asked. Wei Jiaxi said faintly, I think we should wait. Mo Tienga nodded in agreement. Upon seeing their reactions, Han Xingyu said, I also agree with waiting. We still can't see the current situation clearly, so it'd be better to stay put and deal with the ever-changing situation. Since the 3 of them said so, Luo Fengxue was also speechless. Alright, I also can't think of any ideas. The 4 of them agreed that Han Xingyu would be the one to negotiate with Clan. When Clan's patriarch learned of their conjectures, he became very nervous. Mo Tienga took some time to enter the virtual sky world, but she sat silently in the small room for a long time. In fact, if she stayed in the virtual sky world and didn't go out, she would naturally be very safe. However, excluding Clan, which had nothing to do with her, what would happen to Luo Fengxue and the other 2? Logically speaking, Xianqing School gave her a place to live and provided her with the things she needed to cultivate. She owed them a favor, not a grudge. In terms of affection, the 3 of them were her martial sisters. Wei Jiaxi aside, Han Xingyu and Luo Fengxue had always taken good care of her. Considering both sides, how could she disregard their safety? Of course, she could also bring them into the virtual sky world. However, she immediately rejected this idea. The virtual sky world definitely couldn't appear in front of others. Otherwise, her life would definitely be in danger. After thinking for a while, Mo Tienga made up her mind. She was no longer a little aura-refining cultivator who had no ability to protect herself anymore. She was now in the foundation building realm. She had a certain amount of ability, and she also had several magic treasures. Demonic beasts weren't good at using external objects, so she had a lot of confidence in escaping. With this thought in mind, she opened her Qingquan bag and began to prepare. The magic weapons she had were the purple wooden cauldron, the white silk handkerchief, the enchanting lantern, the spirit-concealing pendant, and the virtual sky world. Among them, the purple wooden cauldron and the virtual sky world were useless in fights of magical powers, and the spirit-concealing pendant was the auxiliary type. Only the white silk handkerchief and the enchanting lantern could be used for direct attacks. Other magic tools included the shuttle of flying Apsara, the heaven and earth cloud silk armor, the land-fleeing ruler, and the flying needle she bought not long ago. The heaven and earth cloud silk armor could be worn directly on her body, the land-fleeing ruler was used for escaping, the shuttle of flying Apsara was used for attacking, and the flying needle was used for sneak attacks. In addition, there were talismans and other things given to her by martial Uncle Xianin. If she really thought about it, she had a lot of magic treasures in her hands. Her odds of winning against cultivators in the same realm as her were relatively high, let alone against demonic beasts. Besides, she only needed a little bit of time to return to the virtual sky world. Using it together with the land-fleeing ruler couldn't be any better. She believed that even if her opponent was a core formation cultivator, as long as she was fast enough, she still had a chance to escape. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tienga revealed a faint smile. The virtual sky world and the fated chances of deification cultivators weren't something everyone could come across. Her current strength was also top-notch among middle-stage foundation building cultivators. Even against late-stage foundation building cultivators, her odds of winning weren't low. If she couldn't win, she could always run. What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 125. The group of 5 stood at the top of the mountain, looking at the flaming peak in the distance. That was the main vein of Mount Skyfire, where the Pill Cauldron Gate was located. The fire was still burning fiercely, but its color had dimmed a lot. With their foundation building divine sense, they couldn't see what was happening there, but they could see the demonic beasts flitting across the sky from time to time not far away. In the past 2 days, Han Xingyu and Patriarch Yu hadn't received any response from the sound-transmitting talismans they had sent. They had long since been mentally prepared for this. The demonic beast's attack on the Pill Cauldron School had already begun. The people standing here, Mo Tiange, Han Xingyu, Luo Fengxue, Patriarch Yu, and his wife, were all silent. This matter had already exceeded their capabilities. Aside from waiting, there was nothing they could do. In fact, they could understand why the demonic beasts were so obsessed with Pill Cauldron School. The Danding School was the #1 alchemist sect on Kunwu Mountain, and medicinal pills were exactly what demonic beasts lacked the most. Every time they came out of the southern forest, they would attack the sects on Kunwu Mountain in order to seize medicinal pills. As soon as they had the chance, they would naturally focus their attacks on the Danding School. However, Danding School wasn't to be trifled with. Although it was only slightly larger than a mid-level cultivation sect, it also had 3 nascent soul grandmasters. In addition to the mountain-protecting grand formation, magic treasures, and so on, the demonic beasts would have to expend a lot of effort to capture Danding School. Now, these people were happy on one side and worried on the other. They were happy because these demonic beasts completely ignored them and had no intention of attacking them. However, they were worried because if the Pill Cauldron School was attacked, their family and friends, the 5 of them were preoccupied, and no one spoke. Wei Jiaxi still hadn't recovered, so the other 2 foundation-building cultivators from Yu Clan were responsible for patrolling the area. These people were merely foundation establishment cultivators. In this kind of sect war, they could not do much at all. After a long time, Han Xingyu finally said, "Let's go back." Mo Tiange and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other then nodded. Han Xingyu then turned around and said, "Patriarch Yu, my martial sister and I will take our leave first. If there are any movements, please inform us." Patriarch Yu's expression was solemn as he cupped his hands absent-mindedly. Han Xingyu shook her head and sighed. She then led Mo Tiange and Luo Fengxue down the mountain. Yu Clan was a clan that relied on Pill Cauldron Gate, and they even had cultivators in the sect. Presumably, Patriarch Yu was more troubled than them. If Danding School fell in this demonic beast attack, then Yu Clan would definitely not have a good ending. Even if they weren't devoured by the demonic beasts, they wouldn't have any backing in the future and would definitely be bullied and humiliated again. Unfortunately, Yu Clan's current foundation-building cultivators were all very old. Thinking up to this point, Han Xingyu could only shake her head. Every sect or clan had their own difficulties. Even for herself, it was already very good if she could preserve her own life. Once she returned to her residence, Mo Tiange entered the virtual sky world again to meditate and cultivate. Right now, the war was right in front of her, so she wasn't in the mood to learn pill concocting. The little inferno beast she caught to provide her ardent yang real fire was raised in the virtual sky world while she cultivated the soul refining art. Now that she cultivated the soul refining art without any misgivings, she didn't have any misgivings about cultivating the soul refining art. Therefore, in the past few days, she devoted almost all of her energy to cultivating it. Right now, her divine sense had more or less formed a physical body. This was her hidden trump card. Even martial uncle Xianyin, who gave her the technique, probably didn't expect her to be able to cultivate her divine sense into a corporeal form so quickly. Other people who cultivated this art would tremble with fear. It was simply impossible for them to be like her. Furthermore, after going through the 5 spirits cultivation art, her primordial spirit was no longer as weak as before, so cultivating the soul refining art could be said to be twice the result with half the effort. Her current realm was probably something ordinary people would need to cultivate for several dozen years to be able to compare to. In a fight of magical powers, all kinds of magic tools, magic weapons, and talismans had their nemesis, and they were also on guard against each other. The reason why Mo Tienga regarded the soul-refining art as her trump card was because she was only in the foundation-building realm. She reckoned no one would expect her to be able to control her divine sense to attack others. In the following days, aside from cultivating, she also went out to inquire about the situation of Danding School's war. Their decision not to attack was indeed correct. Since Danding School had nascent soul cultivators, the demonic beasts would naturally only dare to attack them if they had 8th rank or higher cultivators. From what they heard, the demonic beasts had 3 8th rank demonic beasts and 1 9th rank demonic beast. As for Danding School, they only had 3 nascent soul cultivators in total, and all of them were in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. Their strength couldn't be compared to Danding School's. The current war was very tragic. The mountain ridge where Yu Clan was located was too close to Danding School. A foundation-building cultivator's journey would take a day, but a core formation and nascent soul cultivator's journey would only take a few minutes. Because of this, battles would affect this area from time to time. Fortunately, the power of the 4 symbols formation Mo Tienga modified was quite strong. Now, all Yu Clan's cultivators stayed inside the 4 symbols formation and opened it, so they were temporarily safe. However, safety was only temporary. Now that Danding School had fallen, Yu Clan would definitely be affected. At that time, they would also be involved. What they could do now was to preserve their strength as much as possible. In addition, they weren't Danding School's disciples, so Xianqing School wouldn't ignore Master Daoist Xuanin's presence. Observing the situation, cultivating, and waiting for an opportunity. A month later, the battle entered a stalemate. More and more demonic beasts appeared in the vicinity of Yu Clan, so they finally couldn't stay out of it. Fellow Taoists, please take a seat. In the middle of the night, while Mo Tienga was still cultivating, Yu Clan's steward came to summon the 4 martial sisters. The 4 of them were baffled. Could it be that something important happened? Inside the hall, the moonstones emitted a soft light, illuminating the hall as bright as day. All 4 foundation-building cultivators of Yu Clan were present. Once Yu Clan's patriarch saw them, he smiled and politely asked them to sit. For matters like this, Han Xingyu was the one who handled them. After Mo Tienga greeted the people of Yu Clan, she silently sat down on the guest seat. Patriarch Yu, may I ask why you called us sisters here so late at night? After exchanging conventional greetings, Han Xingyu went straight to the point. Hesitation appeared on Patriarch Yu's face. It seemed he found it a bit difficult to speak, so he cast an awkward glance at Han Xingyu. Han Xingyu smiled and said, although you and I don't come from the same sect, we're all on the same boat in the current situation. What else can Patriarch Yu not say? Upon hearing what Han Xingyu said, a resolute expression appeared on Patriarch Yu's face. He nodded and said, what fellow Daoist Han said makes sense. Therefore, I think it'd be better to explain this matter to fellow Taoists. He paused for a moment before continuing. Fellow Daoist Han should know that our Yu Clan is only a small clan relying on Danding School. We don't have any core formation cultivators, nor do we have any influence. Right now, in Danding School, we only have 2 juniors who have hopes of advancing to the core formation realm. There's simply nothing for demonic beasts to covet. I think your master sent you to our Yu Clan because he wants to take care of you. Based on this, your future in Xianqing School will definitely be bright. When he said that, aside from Han Xingyu, he also cast a glance at Mo Tienga. Although this Patriarch Yu's cultivation level wasn't obvious, he was very experienced. Han Xingyu was already in the late stage of the foundation-building realm. As an elite disciple, she would definitely advance to the core formation realm one day. Although she might not succeed, ordinary disciples like them couldn't compare to her. As for Mo Tienga, according to Han Xingyu, she was already in the middle stage of the foundation-building realm at such a young age, so her future was also limitless. The current development of the situation has certainly exceeded your expectations. Right now, although our Yu clan can still be considered safe, we're also in a precarious situation. Right now, more and more battles are happening outside the formation. From time to time, cultivators from Danding School ask for help, so our Yu clan can't just ignore them. Fellow Taoists, it's only a matter of time before our Yu clan joins the battle. Today, I learned from an injured Danding School cultivator that one of our 2 Yu clan disciples in Danding School has already fallen. At this point, a slight fluctuation finally appeared on Patriarch Yu's calm and tranquil expression. Yu clan only had 2 cultivators with hopes of advancing to the core formation realm. Now that one of them had fallen in the battle, it was a huge loss for Yu clan. Besides, that person might even be a junior of Patriarch Yu's. Patriarch Yu continued, since the situation is like this, I'll tell fellow Taoists the truth. Patriarch Yu straightened his expression and a resolute expression flitted across his face. He said word by word, since we can't avoid this disaster, our Yu clan will join the battle from now on. Mo Tiange and the others raised their heads and looked at each other, but none of them said anything. In fact, they weren't surprised. Yu clan would be dragged into the demonic beast battle sooner or later. However, they were a bit surprised that Patriarch Yu was so resolute. Mo Tiange looked to her left and right. When Madame Yu heard what Patriarch Yu said, she quietly held Patriarch Yu's hand as if she wanted to comfort him. The other 2 foundation-building cultivators of Yu clan also calmly looked at Patriarch Yu. Obviously, they approved of his decision. Han Xingyu was silent for a moment before she finally raised her head and said with a smile, "We admire fellow Taoists' decisiveness." Patriarch Yu smiled and said sincerely, "But if we do this, we'll be wasting your master's painstaking efforts. Fellow Taoists came to our Yu clan to help us protect our clansmen, but now, we're going to drag fellow Taoists down with us. I feel guilty about this matter, so I'm telling you this frankly. For the sake of your own safety, fellow Taoists can leave. We definitely won't stop you." Patriarch Yu's expression was sincere and didn't seem fake. However, this matter was of great importance, so Han Xingyu didn't immediately make a decision. Instead, she pondered for a while before she said, "Patriarch Yu, since that's the case, could you let us martial sisters discuss this matter for a while?" "Of course." Patriarch Yu revealed a smile. "Our Yu clan will join the battle tomorrow. Fellow Taoists can go back and discuss it in detail. If you come to a decision, it won't be too late to tell us tomorrow." "In that case, many thanks." Han Xingyu stood up and saluted him. Patriarch Yu hastily returned the salute. "We don't dare." Mo Tiange could see that Patriarch Yu naturally wanted them to stay. After all, their strength was far superior to the foundation-building cultivators of Yu clan. However, the current situation was unpredictable. Core formation and even nascent soul cultivators would participate in the battle, so staying here wasn't safe. Besides, they were Xianqing school disciples, so they couldn't be offended. The 4 martial sisters returned to the small courtyard they lived in and gathered in Han Xingyu's room. For a while, the 4 of them didn't say anything. Even Luo Fengxue, who was the most talkative, looked like she had a lot on her mind. After a long time, Han Xingyu raised her head and swept a glance at them. She said, "All right, do you have anything you want to say? This matter is of great importance, so I won't use my eldest martial sister's name to make a decision. If you have something to say, you can speak frankly." Eldest martial sister. Luo Fengxue wanted to say something but hesitated. Mo Tiange and Luo Fengxue had been friends for several years. Upon seeing the struggle on Luo Fengshue's face, Mo Tiange could roughly guess what Luo Fengxue wanted to say. Han Xingyu said, "There's only us martial sisters here, what's there to be afraid of?" Luo Fengxue looked at Wei Jiaxi and Mo Tiange then said, "Eldest martial sister, we're not Danding school disciples. Now that the situation is critical, they definitely won't blame us if we leave on our own." Han Xingyu nodded. "You're right. We cultivators don't value loyalty like chivalrous people do. Now that we're out of our strength, we can naturally leave. Having obtained Han Xingyu's affirmation, Luo Fengxue felt reassured. She stared at Han Xingyu expectantly and said, "Then we." Han Xingyu shook her head. "That's not what I'm thinking. Think about it. Right now, the flames of war are everywhere. Even if we leave this place, how are we going to return to Xianqing school?" Luo Fengxue was stunned. She wasn't good at fights of magical powers, so she naturally hoped to leave the war situation as soon as possible. However, what Han Xingyu said was also true. When we leave Xianqing school, our masters and martial uncles will send us back with flying magic weapons. If we return to Xianqing school on our own, I'm afraid it'll take us 1 or 2 months. On the way back, there will be flames of war everywhere. How are we going to protect ourselves? Luo Fengxue couldn't answer this question. Eldest martial sister. Do you support staying here? Han Xingyu slowly shook her head. No. For the time being, I can't think of a solution. I still don't have an idea. Luo Fengxue was also silent. Han Xingyu then looked at Wei Jessie. Second junior martial sister, what do you think? Wei Jessie's cultivation level had already recovered in the past few days, but her complexion was still pale. When she heard Han Xingyu's question, she seemed to be in a daze. Han Xingyu called out again, "Second junior martial sister?" Wei Jessie suddenly realized that the three people's gazes were on her, but she only said, "I'll let eldest martial sister decide." Upon seeing Wei Jessie's appearance, Han Xingyu sighed inwardly. In the end, she turned towards Mo Tiange and asked, "Tiange, what about you?" Mo Tiange muttered to herself for a long time before she finally said, "Senior martial sister Han, I think we'd better stay here for the time being and observe the situation." Stay here? Han Xingyu and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other, then shifted their gazes to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange nodded. Correct. Senior martial sisters, let me put it this way. I'm quite confident in you clan's 4 symbols formation. Unless several core formation cultivators or above attack it, it won't be broken. Moreover, with senior martial sister Han in charge and senior martial sister Luo familiar with personnel management, and me in charge of the formation, the chances of us persevering are very high. Mo Tiange quickly swept her gaze over them, then said, "Of course, this also has its risks. If this place is noticed by high-ranked demonic beasts and they focus their attacks on us, we might not be able to escape." Han Xingyu and Luo Fengxue both sank into contemplation. Compared to what Mo Tiange said earlier, the risks weren't too great. They also didn't have any better ideas, it was just staying here or leaving. However, escaping with their lives in this chaotic war was also not easy. The first to make a decision was Han Xingyu. After thinking for a moment, Han Xingyu revealed a determined expression and said, "Tiange, since you're confident, why don't we stay here?" Eldest martial sister. Luo Fengxue called out. Han Xingyu turned towards Luo Fengxue and said with a faint smile, "I've been thinking about it. If we want to preserve our lives, we might as well borrow Yu Clan's strength. Of course, their strength isn't that strong, so the 4 of us can exterminate Yu Clan if we want to. However, Yu Clan has been rooted here for a long time, so we can make use of it. Whether we borrow people or borrow land, it'll be much safer than staying outside by ourselves." But Luo Fengshue's mind was in a mess. She hadn't built her foundation long ago and had lived in a famous cultivation group since she was a child, so she wasn't interested in fights of magical powers. Now that they were involved in a chaotic war, she was the most helpless one. "Fengxue, don't be afraid." Han Xingyu comforted her softly. "You've never been in a war, so you're not used to it. Your second martial sister and I both experienced the demonic beast riot 60 years ago. We were also like this in the beginning, but after experiencing a lot, we gradually got used to it. Have some confidence in yourself. You're a disciple of a famous cultivation group, and you also have magic tools and magic weapons bestowed upon you by Master. You're much stronger than other people, so what's there to be afraid of?" After being comforted, Luo Fengxue actually calmed down a bit. Upon seeing Luo Fengshue's appearance and receiving a meaningful glance from Han Xingyu, Mo Tiange walked over, held Luo Fengshue's hand and said with a smile, "Senior martial sister Luo, you're my senior martial sister. You mustn't lose to me." Luo Fengxue revealed a bitter smile and said calmly, "Tiange, I won't hide it from you. In the past, I didn't think you were capable, but after this incident, I realized I was a frog at the bottom of a well and underestimated others. A few days ago, it was you who reminded me not to be too anxious, and these past few days, you've been much calmer than me. Senior martial sister Luo." Seeing that Luo Fengxue was becoming more and more remorseful as she spoke, Mo Tiange interrupted her. "The current situation is like this. You and I should pull ourselves together. What Tiange said is right." Han Xingyu was very perceptive. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's gloomy expression, she knew Mo Tiange might have thought of something unpleasant, so she immediately changed the topic. "In addition, there's another reason why I want to stay here." "What?" Han Xingyu took out a jade slip and said, "Before we left, Master told me that if something unexpected happened, I must protect you and support him." This time, even Wei Jiasi, who didn't care about this matter, was stunned. They all knew that Han Xingyu had a steady temperament and handled matters steadily. As the eldest martial sister, she served their master diligently and took good care of her junior martial brothers and sisters, so their master had always trusted her. In comparison, Wei Jiasi didn't find it unfair because she always thought that their eldest martial sister was good at handling miscellaneous matters, so it was normal for their master to entrust matters unrelated to their cultivation to their eldest martial sister. But now that Han Xingyu took out their master's secret order, Wei Jiasi felt a bit upset. As it turned out, not only did their master trust their eldest martial sister, but he also entrusted her with an important task. Wei Jiasi, who had also been their master's advanced inner disciple for a long time, actually didn't know anything about this beforehand. Han Xingyu didn't know or care about Wei Jiasi's little thoughts. She handed the jade slip to Wei Jiasi, who then passed it to them one by one. After the three of them finished reading the jade slip, Han Xingyu finally said, "Master already anticipated that this trip wouldn't go smoothly, so he gave me this order and told me to do as I see fit. Right now, I think Tiange's words are very reasonable. That being the case, we might as well do as Master said." The three of them didn't say anything. The order Master Daoist Xianin left behind was very simple. He told them to wait for an opportunity to find a place outside the Danding Gate. If there was any danger, they were to stay there to support the other disciples in order to preserve their strength. From what he said, it was obvious that he already knew this trip wouldn't be simple, so he sent them out to avoid dragging them into the flames of war. First, it was because he wanted to take care of the female disciples. Second, it was because he had confidence in their ability to handle matters. "Senior martial sister Han," after a long time, Mo Tiange said slowly, "Since that's the case, let's do as martial uncle Xianin said. I think Yu Clan's decision is perfect. We might as well borrow Yu Clan's land for the time being and rely on each other. If things go south, we're all foundation building cultivators, so it'll be easy for us to escape." What Tiange said is exactly what I thought. Second junior martial sister, Fengxue, what do you two think? Chapter 126. Mo Tiange stood on the tallest tower of Yu Clan's gate, staring at the defensive barrier of the formation above Yu Clan. Two cultivators and a demonic beast were fighting on it. One of the cultivators was overjoyed to see her and shouted, "Fellow Daoist, please help us." Mo Tiange frowned slightly, feeling a bit unhappy. That demonic beast was a 5th-rank demonic beast, which was equivalent to an early-stage core formation human cultivator. However, demonic beasts didn't have talismans, magic weapons, and the like, so their fighting abilities were a bit weaker than early-stage core formation cultivators. But in any case, it was a 5th-rank demonic beast. It was difficult for two middle-stage foundation-building cultivators to fight it, yet they actually led it to Yu Clan's territory to ask for help. They really didn't care about the lives of Yu Clan's mortals and early-stage cultivators. Maybe they even wanted to divert the disaster to someone else so they could escape. Although this idea was a bit malicious, Mo Tiange wasn't afraid to speculate about other people's intentions. Even if they didn't mean it, it was subconsciously so. Facing a fifth-ranked demonic beast, even if they were disciples of famous cultivation groups, the two of them couldn't fight back and could only dodge its attacks. It was getting harder and harder for them to dodge. The other person shouted, "Fellow Taoist, are you going to stand by and watch?" His tone was really unpleasant. Mo Tiange glanced around. There were only a few low-level cultivators nearby looking at them in awe. The others had already been settled by Clan Master Yu. She chuckled softly and said faintly, "I'm a guest here, not the host. This kind of matter should be decided by the host. You two should wait." You, the person who spoke later, turned purple. He could naturally tell Mo Tiange was being perfunctory, but right now, their lives were at stake. Because of this carelessness, the other person was hit by the demonic beast's wing. He screamed and flew out. "Junior Marshal Brother!" The person shouted and glared at Mo Tiange. He started to lead the demonic beast around in circles. He really couldn't hold on any longer. Fortunately, Clan Master Yu and his wife hurried over. Seeing this scene, he said to Mo Tiange, "Fellow Taoist Mo, please help us." Mo Tiange knew what he meant and nodded. "I'll open the formation. You go and save the injured person. Remember, you have to be fast. There's only half an hour left. If you can't come in by then, I'll close the formation for the safety of others." Yes. In the past few days, they had received a lot of cultivators one after another. Patriarch Yu was also very clear about Mo Tiange's rules. Now, if she said one incense stick was one incense stick, then it was one incense stick. What's more, a rank 5 demonic beast had appeared this time, which was beyond their ability. It was already very good that they could save people. Clan Head Yu shouted, "Fellow Taoist above, we will open the array formation for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Please come in as soon as possible. If you can't come in, there is nothing we can do." The man was overjoyed and shouted, "Thank you very much. Please open the formation as soon as possible. I can't hold on any longer." Mo Tiange still didn't hurry. She put her palms together, made a hand seal, and began to read an incantation. This ancient 4 symbols formation wasn't controlled by formation flags like today's. Instead, it had corresponding hand seals and incantations, so it was easier to control it. Along with her incantation, a layer of light flashed on the protective barrier, followed by a buzzing sound. Upon hearing this sound, Mo Tiange chanted the incantation even faster. All of a sudden, a sharp cry rang out and a small hole appeared on the top of the protective barrier. Mo Tiange shouted, "Hurry up." Clan Master Yu responded and immediately flew out with his wife, pouncing on the person on the ground. The cultivator being chased by the demonic beast was overjoyed and rushed over. Mo Tiange was furious. This person was really selfish. He directly rushed in like this. Wasn't he afraid of attracting the demonic beast to harm Yu clan? Her expression became even more solemn as she stared at the demonic beast behind the man. She changed her hand seal, and the formation eyes of the 4 symbols formation suddenly shone, changing into the light of the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise, which shone on the demonic beast. The light seemed to have substance. When it shone on the demonic beast, it stagnated and emitted smoke. The demon beast let out an angry roar. It flapped its wings and began to fight with the light beast created by the formation. In an instant, the spirit stones in the formation eyes shattered, and even the spiritual aura inside her body disappeared like crazy. Mo Tiange clenched her teeth and secretly released her divine sense. She looked for an opportunity between the 5th-rank demonic beast and the 4 symbols formation and ruthlessly lashed it. The 5th-rank demonic beast immediately roared in pain. The light of the 4 symbols formation pounced on it and bit it. The cultivator took this opportunity to rush into the formation. Clan Master Yu and his wife also moved quickly and entered after the cultivator. Seeing this, Mo Tiange immediately made a hand seal. Together with the incantation, a light flashed on the protective cover, and it closed again. The demonic beast struggled several times, but seeing that it was to no avail, it finally left unwillingly. Seeing that the formation closed and the demonic beast left, everyone present heaved sighs of relief. Mo Tiange slowly lowered her hands, clutched her chest, and coughed. "Fellow Taoist Mo." Madame Yu cried out in alarm. Mo Tiange wiped the blood she coughed up and shook her head. "I'm fine. I used too much spiritual aura just now. Quickly go to each formation eye and add spirit stones." Madame Yu didn't dare to be negligent and personally went to the formation eye. Mo Tiange finally turned to look at Clan Master Yu and the two cultivators who just came in. Clan Master Yu was examining the injuries of the cultivator who fainted, while the other cultivator was meditating with his eyes closed. He didn't even spare her a glance. Mo Tiange shook her head. She swallowed a small reversion pill, then no longer paid attention to them. Among the two cultivators, the one who fainted was the younger one. He seemed to be in his early 30s. The one who was meditating was the older one. He seemed to be in his 40s. The two of them were wearing Danding School's robes and had an arrogant attitude. They were probably elite disciples. Moreover, they were already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm at such a young age. Presumably, they had a bright future ahead of them, which was why they treated people like this. Saving the two of them was within her ability, and it was also Clan Master Yu's request. Mo Tiange didn't expect their gratitude, so she didn't take it to heart. After Clan Master Yu examined the man's injuries, Madame Yu returned, and the two of them worked together to heal the man. Before long, the man faintly woke up and called out, "Uncle, Auntie." Seeing that he woke up, Clan Master Yu said happily, "Good, good. It's good that you're awake. Don't talk for now. Go back and heal your injuries." Mo Tiange was stunned. So this person was actually the only foundation building cultivator from Yu clan in Danding School? No wonder he asked her to help him so naturally. This was his home. However, in any case, she was still a disciple of another cultivation group, so he was being too rude. After sending someone to take that Yu clan junior back, Clan Master Yu turned around and cupped his hands towards Mo Tiange with sincerity. "I can't thank you enough. Fellow Taoist Mo, I'll remember this favor." Mo Tiange said faintly, "Clan Master Yu doesn't need to be polite. I just did what I could." Patriarch Yu didn't take Mo Tiange's words seriously. He took out a bottle of medicinal pills and said, "Fellow Taoist Mo was injured just now. This is called Green Hanging Pill, a secret medicine of my Yu clan. Its effect is much better than the small reversion pill." Secret healing pills happened to be what Mo Tiange lacked, so she accepted the bottle without hesitation. "Thank you." After a while, the cultivator who was healing on the spot finally opened his eyes and exhaled. He looked up and stood up to greet Clan Master Yu. "Uncle Yu, thank you for saving me." Clan Master Yu smiled and helped him up. "I didn't see you clearly just now. Turns out it's Junior Martial Brother Zhou." "Junior Martial Brother Zhou is too polite." "What do you mean by uncle?" "Our cultivation levels are the same, so I'm already very happy that you called me Senior Martial Brother." This Junior Martial Brother Zhou didn't say anything else. Mo Tiange could see that he didn't really care about Clan Master Yu, who had no hope of making a realm breakthrough. He was probably only being polite because of that Junior Martial Brother Yu. A trace of contempt flashed in his eyes as he asked Clan Master Yu, "May I know where Junior Martial Brother Yu is?" "How are you now?" Clan Master Yu said, "I'm fine. I'm resting in the back. If Junior Martial Brother Zhou wants to see me, I'll have someone lead the way." Soon after, he called a low-level cultivator over and gave him some instructions. Junior Martial Brother Zhou cupped his hands, gave Mo Tiange a similarly contemptuous glance, then followed the low-level cultivator. After that person left, Clan Master Yu sighed, then turned to Mo Tiange and said, "Fellow Taoist Mo, please don't mind him. This junior martial brother Zhou's temperament has always been like this. He doesn't have any bad intentions. Mo Tiange smiled. She'd seen this kind of person many times, but none of them were as obvious as this junior martial brother Zhou. Even Wei Jiasi only looked arrogant on the surface. She definitely wouldn't look at people like this, nor would she order people around. This junior martial brother Zhou was the only one who was really annoying. Looking at Mo Tiange's expression, Clan Master Yu roughly guessed what she was thinking. He felt a bit embarrassed, but he didn't say anything. This junior martial brother Zhou wasn't a member of Yu clan. Out of respect for his nephew, it was enough for him to comfort her. The two of them stood silently on top of Yu clan's gate tower, gazing into the distance. From time to time, they would see flight lights passing by, as well as the lights of fights of magical powers. In the past 2 days, they'd heard about the current situation from the cultivators who came in from the outside. The current situation wasn't good. All of Danding School's disciples had been sent to the battlefield, and even the part-time disciples were no exception. Since part-time disciples were also sent to the battlefield, it was clear how desperate the situation was. Later, part of Danding School's great mountain protecting formation was shattered. All the cultivation clans attached to it received Danding School's order to fight. Of course, not all clans obeyed the order. Now that Danding School was on the brink of destruction, some people naturally wanted to stay out of trouble. However, demonic beasts wouldn't negotiate with humans, so they could only hope they were lucky and didn't run into a high-level demonic beast. There were many reasons why Yu clan participated in the war. First, Yu clan was too small. If they wanted to preserve their strength before choosing a strong cultivator to attach themselves to, they might as well gamble with their lives that Danding School, a cultivation group that had existed for several thousand years, wouldn't be defeated by a demonic beast riot. Second, one of Yu clan's promising foundation-building cultivators had already died in this chaotic war. Although they were angry, they actually let go of the matter. No matter how bad things were, they might not necessarily be able to preserve their strength, so they might as well fight with their lives on the line. Because of this, Mo Tiange rather admired this clan master Yu. Being able to be so decisive, this clan master Yu could also be considered a character. She heard Danding School had sent out countless summoning talismans asking for help. Presumably, in a month or two, their comrades would come to help. If it was too early, those people wouldn't want to sacrifice themselves. If it was too late, Danding School would be defeated, which would most likely affect the level of pill concocting in all of Kunwu. Presumably, they just had to endure until then. The two of them watched silently for a while. Then Clan Master Yu suddenly said, "In a few days, it'll be the new year." Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. Cultivation was timeless, and cultivators didn't pay attention to this kind of secular ceremony. Whether it was in Yunwu sect, Xianqing school, or when she was with second uncle, they never celebrated the new year. At most, they only told her that she'd grown 1 year older. Since this clan master Yu suddenly brought it up like this, it seemed the people of cultivation clans paid more attention to these things. Gazing at the firelight in the distance, Clan Master Yu smiled gloomily and said, "During the new year last year, my other grandnephew advanced to the foundation building realm when he was just 30 years old. At that time, we thought Yu clan's future was bright and might produce a core formation cultivator. Unexpectedly, during this new year, my grandnephew already passed away." Clan Master Yu didn't say anything, but Mo Tiange could still feel his sorrow. For cultivators of cultivation clans, having no successor was probably the most sorrowful thing. Just like Yi clan in the past. Even though they produced an amazingly talented core formation cultivator, they had no successor and in the end, they had to withdraw from Mount Qingmeng in dejection. Clan Master Yu wiped the corners of his eyes, then turned around and said with a smile, "Fellow Daoist Mo, don't blame me. I'm old, so I tend to let my imagination run wild." Alas, Mo Tiange shook her head. "It's nothing." The two of them were silent for a while. Then Clan Master Yu asked, "Fellow Daoist Mo, you're quite young. You don't seem to have a technique to preserve your appearance. May I know how old you are?" Mo Tinga paused. Asking about someone's age was something cultivators rarely did. However, this clan master Yu was quite old, so treating him as an elder wasn't a big deal. She thought for a moment then answered, after this new year, I'll be 25. 25. Clan Master Yu was shocked. Fellow Daoist Mo, you're already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, but you're actually only 25? Mo Tinga nodded. Although it was surprising, the middle stage of the foundation building realm wasn't a shocking cultivation level, so it wasn't a big deal. Clan Master Yu sighed from the bottom of his heart. No wonder your senior martial sister praised you for being young and promising. I thought my grandnephew could be considered outstanding among the elite disciples of big cultivation groups, but compared to fellow Daoist, he's really not worth mentioning. Mo Tiange smiled but didn't feel proud of herself. Clan Master Yu, you're too polite. In fact, it hasn't been long since I built my foundation. I only managed to enter the middle stage of the foundation building realm because of my elder's love and some fated chances. I'm really ashamed to say this. Hey! Clan Master Yu said earnestly, fated chances are also a part of strength. Fellow Daoist Mo, you really don't need to be so modest. If it were my untalented sons and grandsons, even if they were given enormous fated chances, I'm afraid they still wouldn't be able to advance to such a realm. Mo Tiange still smiled and cupped her hands at Clan Master Yu's praise. Clan Master Yu's words showed that he didn't know what kind of great fated chances she'd encountered. After obtaining the art of the origin, her crippled spiritual roots suddenly became heaven-gifted. After obtaining guidance from a deification cultivator, her future cultivation journey would be shortened by at least 10 to 20 years compared to others. Coupled with the 5 spirits body cultivating fate, she could be said to have reduced the time she needed to cultivate the deification art by more than half. Lastly, there was the virtual sky world. Although she hadn't had the time to use the greatest treasure inside, the formation in front of her now came from it. If it was before, she would have definitely been like Clan Master Yu, thinking that fated chances were only auxiliary. However, after obtaining them, she realized that fated chances really couldn't be underestimated. Back then, there was a rumor in Kunwu that a cultivator with an extremely poor aptitude obtained an enormous fated chance and advanced to the nascent soul realm. With his divine power, he could run amok in the celestial pole. Now, it seemed like it was the truth. Clan Master Yu said, Fellow Daoist Mo, may I know which Master Daoist of Xianqing school you and your fellow martial sisters are under? When they came, they only said they received orders from their master and accepted Danding School's dispatch to provide assistance, but they didn't mention their master's name. With Clan Master Yu's status, he probably wasn't qualified to know these things. However, this matter wasn't a secret. Mo Tiange said, my senior martial sisters are all martial uncle Xuanin's disciples. I was also taught by martial uncle Xianin, so we can be considered to be from the same sect. I see. Clan Master Yu didn't ask why she called him martial uncle alone. After all, this kind of matter was a personal secret. The two of them chatted for a while. Clan Master Yu saw that Mo Tiange had this kind of cultivation level at such a young age and treated people very calmly, so he wanted to befriend her. Thus, Mo Tiange also treated him amiably. Perhaps they'd really be useful in the future by forming a predestined relationship. Just as they were talking, someone came to report that the condition of the young foundation building cultivator from Yu clan had changed. Clan Master Yu was extremely worried and immediately rushed over. Mo Tiange originally didn't plan to care, but Han Qingyu happened to come to take over, so she secretly ordered Mo Tiange to go and take a look at the situation. Mo Tiange followed Clan Master Yu into the inner courtyard of Yu clan. When she entered the room, she once again received a hostile gaze from that junior martial brother Zhou. Mo Tiange raised her lips, feeling a bit helpless. This junior martial brother Zhou was a foundation building cultivator who looked to be in his 40s. He was at least 100 years old, yet he was still so childish. This disciple of Danding School didn't seem to be very good after all. Ashi, how are you? Clan Master Yu seemed to have a very close relationship with this cultivator. The young Yu clan cultivator lay on the bed with a gloomy expression and a bitter smile on his face. Uncle, I'm sorry, don't say that. Clan Master Yu held the man's hand tightly and comforted him. Take good care of yourself. You'll get better. We still have a lot of green hanging pills, uncle. The man interrupted him with a sorrowful look in his eyes. Uncle, my injuries. I know them clearly. Maybe they can be healed, but I've probably been beaten back to the aura refining realm. Clan Master Yu's expression was greatly shaken. Mo Tiange saw that his hand, which was holding the man's hand, was trembling slightly. Being beaten back to the aura refining realm. Mo Tiange knew how serious his injuries were. When it came to realms regressing, the better ones could spend several years to regain their cultivation level. As for the worse ones, they might never be able to advance even an inch in their entire lives. Uncle. Upon seeing Clan Master Yu's expression, the man's eyes were filled with tears. I'm sorry. For more than 50 years, you tried your best to train me, but no. Clan Master Yu regained his composure and calmed down. His voice was firm. Don't worry. When the war is over, Uncle will help you think of a way. Don't think too much about it now. Our Yu clan is still fine. We have to get through this hurdle first. The man wiped away his tears. Probably because he didn't want Clan Master Yu to feel sad, he nodded and said, Yes, Uncle, don't worry. I don't want to die yet, however. Mo Tiange clearly saw desolation in his eyes. He obviously knew he wouldn't be able to recover. Mo Tiange shook her head inwardly. With her eyesight, she could roughly see that this man was indeed in bad shape. His meridians were severely damaged. Even if his dantian was fine, he would at least fall back to the early stage of the foundation building realm. Chapter 127. You're saying that person's cultivation level has regressed? Upon hearing Han Xingyu's question, Mo Tiange nodded and said, That's right. I can see that his meridians were damaged too seriously, so his cultivation level regressed. Han Xingyu pondered for a moment then sighed. This is troublesome. Mo Tiange stared at her strangely. Senior Marshal's sister Han, we didn't consider this Yu clan cultivator to be part of our fighting force. Why is it troublesome? Han Xingyu said, Think about it. This clan master Yu decided to participate in the battle because another foundation building junior died. Could it be that because this junior's cultivation level regressed back to the aura refining realm, Yu clan lost all hope and decided to fight to the death with the demonic beasts? Mo Tiange was shocked. This is very possible. Seeing that Mo Tiange understood this point, Han Xingyu smiled bitterly. If it were me, I might also do the same. People without clans probably don't understand this feeling. Clans without hope are just struggling at death's door. I'm afraid this clan master Yu already has this kind of intention. Mo Tiange calmly thought about it then said, Senior Marshal's sister Han, if that's the case, doesn't that mean we'll also, correct? If that's the case, we'll also be in danger. The matter Master entrusted us with won't be easy to handle. Han Xingyu thought for a moment then said, How about this? In a moment, I'll go and see what's going on with that Yu clan brat. If there's a way, I'll lend him a hand, lest Yu clan gives up hope and disregards everything. If there's no way, then we'll withdraw from Yu clan when necessary. We can't throw our lives away for them. Mo Tiange could only nod. Since Senior Marshal's sister said so, let's do it. Mo Tiange stopped talking about Han Xingyu and entered the virtual sky world again. She sat in silence and pondered. Every time she entered the virtual sky world, she would lay a spirit-dispersing formation inside the house to make others feel there was a foundation-building cultivator inside. This was to prevent Han Xingyu and the others from feeling strange and discovering her secret. In the virtual sky world, she could clearly sense everything happening in the outside world. If something happened, she could come out in a flash. Unfortunately, entering the virtual sky world required some effort. Otherwise, she wouldn't have to worry about her life. She was both happy and worried about the current situation. What Mo Tiange was glad about was that Han Xingyu had already made preparations. This senior martial sister Han was the same as Luo Fengxue. They were both good at handling matters. Furthermore, her experience in fights of magical powers was many times richer than Luo Fengxue's. Since Han Xingyu had already made arrangements, Mo Tiange didn't need to put too much thought into it. What worried him was that the Yu family wasn't stable right now, and he didn't know when problems would arise. She thought for a while but still couldn't find a solution, so she shook her head and went back to cultivating. She had already tried out the power of the soul-refining art for the first time when she was helping that Yu Clan Jr. and Zhou cultivator, so she was full of expectations for this cultivation technique. Right now, she was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and had just advanced not too long ago, yet she was able to easily injure a 5th-rank demonic beast. From this, it could be seen that injuries to one's divine sense couldn't be judged by the depth of one's cultivation level. In this way, even if she were to face a core formation cultivator, she still had the ability to resist. He cultivated, and the day passed. The next day, Mo Tiange heard faint footsteps, so she woke up from her cultivation. She immediately emerged from the virtual sky world and pretended to be cultivating. Tiange. It was Luo Fengxue's voice. Mo Tiange removed the formation and opened the door. Senior martial sister Luo? Luo Fengxue looked anxious and her forehead was covered in sweat. She said anxiously, "Quick, let's go." "They're fighting." Mo Tiange was stunned. Luo Fengxue came in and dragged her out. "I don't have time to talk to you. I saw something wrong outside before I went out, so I hurried to find you." Mo Tiange was stunned. She followed Luo Fengxue out the door, but when she looked up, she finally understood what was wrong. The sky was filled with flames. The area outside the Four Symbols Formation's defensive barrier was full of flames. It was daytime, but the flames illuminated the entire Yu clan. If it was nighttime, it would probably be as bright as daytime. Mo Tiange roughly sensed that there were at least a dozen foundation building cultivators and several hundred aura refining cultivators and demonic beasts in the surroundings. She and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other. Both of their faces were deathly pale. What did so many cultivators and demonic beasts mean? It meant that the area around Yu clan had become the main battlefield. Although they'd long expected that a large-scale battle would break out in the vicinity one day, they didn't expect that day to come so soon. The two of them staggered and flew to the highest tower. Sure enough, Han Xingyu and the people from Yu clan were already there, as well as the cultivators they saved one after another during this period of time. Once she saw them, Han Xingyu pulled them over and said solemnly, "I don't know what's going on, but they fought until here today. I don't have time to talk to you right now. Prepare for battle. Yu clan." She cast a glance at Clan Master Yu and the others not far from them, then looked at Mo Tiange. "It won't be long before Yu clan asks you to open the formation. Do as you see fit." Mo Tiange cast a glance at them, then said in a low voice, "Senior martial sister Han means." Han Xingyu smiled bitterly. "I want to get involved, but things are happening too fast. Just do what you need to do. There's no need to have any misgivings. I'll talk to Master, that is, if we can still see him." Since Han Xingyu said that, Mo Tiange naturally understood. She nodded and said, "All right, I understand." Right after they finished speaking, Clan Master Yu came over. "Fellow Taoists." Without waiting for them to finish greeting each other, Clan Master Yu's gaze fell on Mo Tiange. "Today, I'll have to shamelessly ask fellow Taoist for help again." Mo Tiange nodded. She didn't waste time talking nonsense with him and asked straightforwardly, "Clan Master Yu, when do you plan to attack?" Clan Master Yu glanced at the defensive barrier in the sky, then shifted his gaze to the numerous fighting figures in the distance. His expression became firm. "Now." What about the mortals and low-level cultivators? Clan Master Yu's expression turned bitter. I've already moved them to the back of the mountain. It'd be best if they can survive, but if they can't, they can only blame themselves for being unlucky. Since things had reached this point, there was nothing left to say. Mo Tiange took a few steps forward, then laid a simple defensive formation next to her position. She then started to make hand seals, closed her eyes, and recited some incantations. As she recited the incantations, the four symbols formation suddenly emitted a burst of light. The lights of the four symbols, azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise, appeared in the east, west, north, and south. After a flash, a gap appeared in the middle. Clan Master Yu shouted, "Fellow Taoists, if you can't hold on, please quickly enter the formation." Upon hearing such good news, all the cultivators in the fierce battle were delighted. Some clenched their teeth and persevered in killing demonic beasts, while others looked relieved and rushed towards the gap. Whenever a demonic beast chased after them, the lights of the four symbols leaped from the four directions and tore the invaders apart. Several cultivators from Clan Master Yu also jumped out of the gap and began to fight with the demonic beasts. Although Mo Tiange had seen the scene of humans and demons fighting on the day she left Mount Taikang, it was far inferior to what she saw today. In the secular world, hunters hunted beasts and occasionally died in beast stomachs. In the cultivation world, humans hunted beasts and were swallowed by them if they slipped. However, in any case, it was usually humans who dominated, but this wasn't the case today. Seriously speaking, there were more demons, so this battle became even more tragic. Demons used their claws and fangs, humans used their magic weapons and talismans, and they crowded together. Sometimes, humans killed demons, and sometimes, demons ate humans. Fortunately, there were no demonic beasts in the 5th rank or higher this time, so Mo Tiange didn't find it too strenuous to control the four symbols formation. She just had to take restorative panaceas from time to time to replenish her spiritual aura. Han Xingyu and Wei Jiaxi guarded the gap in the formation to reduce the pressure on Mo Tiange. Meanwhile, Luo Fengxue guarded her, feeding her medicinal pills and conveying her intentions to the surrounding cultivators. Mo Tiange didn't know how long this battle lasted. She only felt like blood was flowing like a river. There were several times when she wanted to give up and enter the virtual sky world, regardless of whether others lived or died. However, the precarious situation of the formation made her realize the heavy burden on her shoulders. Even if she wanted to leave, she had to make some arrangements. Otherwise, she would be the first one to suffer the formation's backlash. 5th rank demonic beasts. Those are 5th rank demonic beasts, someone shouted. Mo Tiange suddenly looked up and saw two demonic beasts flying towards her from the horizon. In an instant, both her and Luo Fengshue's faces turned pale. 5th rank demonic beasts were in the early stage of the core formation realm. There were only foundation building cultivators here, and there were also numerous low-rank demonic beasts, Tiange. Han Xingyu shouted, "Give up. Give up on the formation. Let's go." Mo Tiange clenched her teeth, muttered a few incantations and changed her hand seals several times. She then pulled Luo Fengxue, took out the white silk handkerchief and dashed towards the gap in the formation. She temporarily used a secret technique to suppress the formation. Without anyone presiding over it, it could probably hold on for about an hour. During this time, whether they fought or fled, there would presumably be a result. "Senior Martial Sister," Mo Tiange asked once the four of them met up, "What should we do?" Han Xingyu swept her gaze over the surrounding cultivators who had already begun to flee in panic. She could only smile bitterly and say, We should also take advantage of the chaos to escape. We can't hold on any longer." The four of them were speechless. Han Xingyu pulled Luo Fengxue and shouted, "Fengxue, come with me. You two can take care of yourselves. If we escape, we'll meet up in a nearby courtyard." "Got it." Luo Fengxue followed Han Xingyu because Han Xingyu's cultivation level was the highest among them. Mo Tiange and Wei Jiasi were both in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and had rich experience in fights of magical powers, so they could take care of themselves. Mo Tiange stepped on the white silk handkerchief and held the shuttle of flying Apsara in her hand. She also secretly took out the land-fleeing ruler as a backup. If she was unlucky and ran into a 5th-rank demonic beast, Mo Tiange planned to use the land-fleeing ruler to immediately escape thousands of miles away and then use the virtual sky world to hide inside. Although she had already planned to do so, now that she was faced with the real situation, she still felt her palms sweating. That day, when she controlled the 4 symbols formation to fight against a 5th-rank demonic beast, it was because of the formation's power and because the demonic beast had already been exhausted by the others. That was why her soul-refining art was able to succeed in one strike. Now, she didn't have the slightest bit of confidence. After summoning the shuttle of flying Apsara, Mo Tiange dashed left and right, no longer holding back. Once the shuttle of flying Apsara closed, demonic beasts fell from the sky one after another. She didn't stop. After killing one, she immediately went to kill another one blocking her way. Sometimes, when she ran into 2nd or 3rd-rank demonic beasts, she would throw talismans at the same time, striving to quickly subdue the enemy. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, and the ground was covered in blood. Everyone was fighting like crazy. Tiange, behind you. Upon hearing Luo Fengshue's voice, Mo Tiange instantly controlled the white silk handkerchief to rise into the sky. After she turned sideways, she saw what was in front of her. A 5th-rank 2-headed eagle. She was really unlucky. There were only 2 5th-rank demonic beasts, but one of them actually targeted her. Mo Tiange's face turned pale. Her hand was already on the land-fleeing ruler, but that 2-headed eagle had already flapped its wings. The spiritual aura she condensed in her hand was interrupted before it could be released. Mo Tiange somersaulted on the white silk handkerchief, and the shuttle of flying Apsara instantly shot out. This was the first time she fought against a real high-rank demonic beast. A 5th-rank demonic beast in the early stage of the core formation realm. Back then, with second uncle's experience in fights of magical powers, he was still seriously injured despite being surrounded by 5 people, which clearly showed his fighting strength. There were also those cultivators from Yu clan and Zhou clan. If it weren't for their outstanding flying magic tools, they probably wouldn't have lasted that long. How could she deal with them alone now? Therefore, she could only dodge and look for an opportunity to escape. The white silk handkerchief could both defend and fly. If it was used for defense, it could naturally block several attacks from demonic beasts. However, this wasn't a solution. She could only try her best to dodge their attacks and use the shuttle of flying Apsara to harass them for as long as possible so that she could use the land-fleeing ruler. Sure enough, she miscalculated. When facing a real high-ranked demonic beast, she didn't even have time to use the land-fleeing ruler. Tiange. Luo Fengxue watched anxiously. However, she saw Mo Tiange moving up and down, left and right. She was as ethereal as the cloud and as swift as the wind, making it almost impossible to see her figure clearly. She was obviously dodging the 5th-rank demonic beast's attacks, but it seemed like she was teasing it instead. Luo Fengxue was a bit dumbfounded. She already knew this nominal junior martial sister of hers had a rough life. She wandered from place to place and experienced many fights and tribulations. She was different from elite disciples of cultivation groups like them who grew up peacefully. However, she never expected that Mo Tiange, who had just built her foundation, would have this kind of fighting strength and could contend with a 5th-rank demonic beast. It seemed she still had a lot to work on. Fengxue, why are you in a daze? Wei Jiasi, who had blocked a wave of attacks for Mo Tiange, glowered at Mo Tiange and said, "Take care of yourself first." But before Mo Tiange could finish her words, she saw Wei Jiasi controlling her flying sword to attack the 5th-rank 2-headed eagle. This 5th-rank 2-headed eagle had long been enraged by Mo Tiange's attacks. It kept slapping its claws, sending lightning bolts towards Mo Tiange one after another. Mo Tiange was actually very anxious inside. Others couldn't see it, but she was having a hard time. How could it be that easy to dodge a 5th-ranked demonic beast's attacks? If she didn't have a magic weapon like the white silk handkerchief, she would have been struck down long ago. At this moment, Wei Jiaxi suddenly rushed over and slashed the two-headed eagle's wing. Although it didn't cause any damage because the wing was extremely hard, it still allowed Mo Tiange to catch her breath. However, Mo Tiange immediately shouted, "Senior Martial Sister Wei, don't worry about me. I have a way to escape." Upon hearing what Mo Tiange said, Wei Jiaxi was dumbfounded. However, Mo Tiange kept signaling her with her eyes, so after a moment of hesitation, Wei Jiaxi drew her sword and flew away. The two-headed eagle once again angrily clawed at her. Mo Tiange leaped and dodged again. This time, while dodging, she brought the eagle away from the battlefield. Once she escaped, the eagle would definitely attack other people out of anger. She didn't care about other people, but Luo Fengxue and the others were in the vicinity. She didn't want this disaster to fall on them. Besides, after she got used to this demonic beast's rhythm, dodging became a lot easier. Demonic beasts were, after all, demonic beasts. They didn't know how to use talismans or magic weapons, they only knew how to use their bodies and the few spells they were born with to attack. How could they compare to smart human cultivators? In the end, Mo Tiange even had the leisure to use the shuttle of flying Apsara to lure the two-headed eagle to attack her in order to adjust its direction. The two-headed eagle was flustered and exasperated. It suddenly flapped its wings and flew high, looking down at Mo Tiange from above. Right after that, it opened its mouth and shot out a thick lightning bolt. Mo Tiange was greatly shocked. This eagle had always been dull and didn't expect it would suddenly show its might. Without any time to think, she flipped her body over and grabbed the white silk handkerchief. With a wave of her hand, the white silk handkerchief turned into a dense brick wall, blocking all the lightning bolts above her. However, she was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm after all. Even though this white silk handkerchief was a magic weapon, its power wasn't strong enough. She could still feel a strong spiritual aura pressure her even though she was separated by a brick wall. Her body was on the verge of collapse, and she could barely stand. The power of a 5th-rank demonic beast's lightning bolts penetrated the brick wall and pressed down on her. She felt her meridians shaking violently, and she felt pain inch by inch. Her dantian was suddenly compressed, and her spiritual power was almost squeezed until there wasn't a drop left. Perhaps it was because of her willpower, or perhaps it was because her potential was stimulated, but Mo Tiange still didn't fall even though blood was already flowing from the corner of her mouth. She didn't want to die here. Eventually, the lightning bolt gradually weakened and eventually disappeared. Mo Tiange couldn't feel any power, so her legs suddenly went soft and she fell. The brick wall once again turned into the white silk handkerchief, which she held in her hand. As she fell to the ground, she felt her vision blurred. It was as if she used up all her strength just now. Perhaps no middle-stage foundation building cultivator would dare to confront a 5th-rank demonic beast's magic head-on, right? Mo Tiange, who was lying on the ground, realized she was actually in the mood to think about this. That double-headed eagle seemed to be extremely angry just now. Now that it landed in front of her, it wasn't in a hurry to rush forward to kill her. Instead, it let out a complacent cry. A 5th-rank demonic beast was equivalent to an early-stage core formation cultivator, so it had the basic ability to think. It must have been very angry after being fooled by her like that. As Mo Tiange thought about this, she couldn't help but smile and clench her fists. The demonic beast looked at her expression, then tilted its head and unexpectedly revealed a doubtful gaze. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange muttered, "You want to know human emotions? You're still too early." Right after she finished speaking, the double-headed eagle seemed to have seen the sly smile in her eyes. However, before it could pounce on her, the little insect in front of it suddenly disappeared. Cough. Thousands of miles away, Mo Tiange coughed up a mouthful of blood. She immediately closed her eyes and silently recited an incantation. She was really lucky just now. That eagle didn't kill her immediately, giving her time to activate the land-fleeing ruler. However, for a 5th-rank demonic beast, a distance of thousands of miles was only a matter of a few breaths. If that demonic beast followed her scent and came here, it would be dangerous. She had to enter the virtual sky world as soon as possible. As she recited the incantation, a light the size of a broad bean slowly emerged between her eyebrows. As she recited the incantation, that light became brighter and brighter until it gradually turned into a huge bead which swallowed her in a flash. Lying in the small layer of the virtual sky world, Mo Tienga once again coughed up a mouthful of blood. Suddenly, a small creature staggered over to her side and whimpered. Mo Tienga forced herself to open her eyes and saw that it was the inferno beast she accidentally caught some time ago. She forced a smile. "I don't have time to feed you today." Before she could finish speaking, her head became heavy and she fell to the ground. Chapter 128. The breeze blew and the bamboo leaves rustled. The water flowed, and the stream meandered. If it weren't for the fact that it was so quiet that no one could smell, this place would be the most beautiful paradise. Inside the virtual sky world, Mo Tienga slowly walked along the stream with her hands in her sleeves. Behind her, a small beast that looked like a squirrel followed behind her while chasing the fluttering butterflies. This little inferno beast had been raised in the virtual sky world for a long time. She didn't know what kind of spiritual plants it ate, but its cultivation level advanced by leaps and bounds. It was now in the 2nd rank. She didn't know whether it was because the virtual sky world was connected to her or because the little inferno beast was grateful to her, but although there was no contract between them, it treated her like a contractual spiritual beast. That day, she managed to escape from the claws of the 5th-rank double-headed eagle with great difficulty. As soon as she entered the virtual sky world, she was unconscious for several months as if she was dead. During this period, the little inferno beast kept feeding her unknown spiritual plants. After several months, she finally regained her breath and could meditate to heal her injuries. In order to resist the double-headed eagle's high-level thunder spell, her body was seriously injured. She thought she would follow in the footsteps of that Yu family's cultivator and her cultivation level would drop. She didn't expect that the spiritual herbs brought by this little inferno beast would be able to stop her injury. Her meridians and dantian had also gone through the 5 spirits cultivating body, so they were tough and firm. Yu Clan's green pendant pills were indeed good stuff. They were useful for both internal and external injuries. After taking the green pendant pills, her injuries were completely healed in just a few months. After her injuries were healed, Mo Tienga didn't want to go out anymore. She could hear the movements outside in the virtual sky world. The battle was very fierce, so it was better to stay inside the virtual sky world to avoid the flames of war. As for Luo Fengxue and the others, she had done her best. Whether they lived or died would depend on their luck. Therefore, she cultivated, concocted medicinal pills, organized medicinal fields, and read ancient books inside the virtual sky world every day. The previous master of the virtual sky world was a person from the distant past era. The cultivation techniques he collected were all related to the origin, which was suitable for her. After the little inferno beast advanced, it didn't know whether its ardent yang real fire also advanced, but its ardent yang real fire evolved into sun real fire, which almost surpassed the quality of Danding School's earthly fire. Because of this, Mo Tienga once again started practicing pill concocting. It just so happened that she obtained a lot of ancient pill recipes from Danding School. It was also time to sort out the medicinal fields inside the virtual sky world. There were many spiritual herbs from the ancient era here that had accumulated for who knew how many hundreds of thousands of years. They were densely packed, covering the entire medicinal field. In some places, because there were too many spirit herbs piled up, they didn't have enough nutrients and were on the verge of withering. Mo Tienga then used the memories in the virtual sky world to collect what she should collect and dig out what she should dig out, then categorize and organize them. It was probably because the original owner's cultivation level was too high that she couldn't use most of the spirit herbs here, so she could only store them in a jade box. For this reason, she built a small bamboo house in the bamboo forest to store them. There were also some basic elixir ingredients that were directly harvested to refine elixirs. By the time the herbal field was cleaned up, the small bamboo house was stuffed to the brim, and the open space in front of the house was piled with weeds. Afraid that some spirit herbs would lose their efficacy after being out of the soil for too long, Tiange could only use some thousand-year-old spirit herbs to concoct elixirs, which made her pill concocting skills advance by leaps and bounds. For this reason, Tiange could only smile bitterly. If other people knew that these spirit herbs, which were hard to find in the outside world, were actually used by her to learn pill concocting, wouldn't they slap her to death? In fact, she actually wanted to exchange them for spirit stones, but the outside world was too chaotic, so she didn't dare to go out. Several months later, the fighting outside was still in full swing. Tiange had already used the spirit herbs she picked from the medicinal fields to concoct the first batch of medicinal pills. Aura-stabilizing pills, look-preserving pills, and longevity pills, these were the most raw materials, and she had also concocted some clear sky pills. As for the spirit-gathering pills she could take now, probably because the gap between her and the original owner's realm was too big, she had fewer spirit herbs, so she could only concoct a few bottles. After concocting the pills, Tiange looked at the bottles and jars on the ground with a bitter smile. These medicinal pills would be a huge fortune if taken outside, but she was trapped here, so she couldn't use them. Aura-stabilizing pills were used to regulate spiritual breath, so she didn't need them now. Clear sky pills were needed for core formation cultivators to cultivate, so she also didn't need them now. She took one look-preserving pill and one longevity pill each. The look-preserving pill didn't seem to have any effect, probably because her cultivation technique itself could preserve her looks. As for the longevity pill, once she swallowed it, she felt as if her whole body was burning. For a moment, she couldn't control the spiritual aura in her body. After adjusting her breath, when the spiritual aura in her whole body finally calmed down, she had a wonderful and indescribable feeling. It was as if her lifespan was endless. According to the lifespan of a foundation-building cultivator, it was about 300 to 400 years. She was only 25 years old now, so she could live for at least another 300 years. If the longevity pill added 500 years to her lifespan, then that would be 800 years. Tiange was very happy about this. In 800 years, no matter what, she should be able to advance to the core formation realm, right? If she was lucky, advancing to the nascent soul realm wouldn't be a problem. After she finished concocting all these medicinal pills, Tiange's pill concocting skills could no longer be mentioned in the same breath as before. She had a 50% success rate in concocting medicinal pills like the longevity pill, so she wasn't much worse than a great concocting master. Unfortunately, there weren't too many pill recipes in the ancient books here. Even if there were, she wouldn't be able to understand them with her current realm, so her pill concocting skills could only stop here. Another piece of good news was that her soul refining art finally showed some initial results. Not only could she refine a physical body, but she could also turn it into a flying knife and hurt people silently. Several months passed just like that. Time passed quickly. By the time the outside world had mostly calmed down and there were very few people fighting here, Tiange had already stayed in the virtual sky world for 2 years. During these 2 years, her pill concocting skills progressed unbelievably fast, and her soul refining art also showed initial results. Thus, she decided to go out and see the situation outside. Barren hilltops, rubble everywhere, withered flowers and plants, and dark red ground. This was the first scene Tiange saw when she came out of the virtual sky world. She remembered that when she entered the virtual sky world, this place was still lush with green grass and fragrant wildflowers. She didn't expect that 2 years later, it would become such a barren scene. The rubble was cracked, which was the trace of spells, and the dark red ground was stained by blood. She sighed softly. After such a fierce battle, she didn't know whether her old friends survived or not. With a flick of her sleeve, she summoned the white silk handkerchief, turned into a streak of light, and flew west. As far as her eyes could see, everything below was the same as the hilltop just now. Almost all the flowers and trees were destroyed, the mountain rocks were cracked, and some were almost razed to the ground. Traces of blood were everywhere, but fortunately, she didn't see any corpses. It seemed that the battle had been over for some time, but there wasn't even a single person. Mo Tiange frowned and continued to fly west. Even if the demonic beast riot was over, it was impossible to not see a single person. She needed to find a few people first and ask them about the current situation. After flying for about 4 hours, Mo Tiange's divine sense finally sensed a cultivator's aura. She was delighted and flew towards the place she sensed. Sure enough, it didn't take long before she saw traces of cultivators. This was a ruin with half-collapsed city walls, majestic but unmaintained palaces, and half-collapsed houses. After a glance, Mo Tiange guessed that this was probably the encampment of a big clan. However, the strange thing was that there wasn't a single defensive formation on it. Occasionally, there were people going in and out of the intact buildings. Judging from their clothes, they didn't seem to belong to the same cultivation group. She thought for a moment, then flew down. When she landed, Mo Tiange looked up and saw that there wasn't even a gatekeeper here. A cultivator came out from inside with a numb expression and bloodstains on his clothes. "Fellow Taoist," Mo Tiange called out. The cultivator she called looked stiff. He glanced at her and realized she was a foundation-building cultivator, so a smile appeared on his face. "Senior, what's the matter?" Mo Tiange asked with a pleasant expression. "May I ask where this place is?" The cultivator was stunned and felt a bit incredulous. "Senior doesn't know where this place is?" He quickly glanced at her and found that she was wearing Enchanting School's uniform. Her clothes were clean, and her face was neat. "Did Senior just leave the school?" Mo Tiange paused for a moment. She just smiled and didn't answer. The cultivator thought he guessed right, so he answered, "This is Mount Tianhua's Qianmen Ridge. Senior doesn't know, but after fighting for almost 3 years, it's like this everywhere. Too many of our human cultivators died, so in the end, we formed an alliance led by the 7 great cultivation groups. They chose their own encampments and led the survivors." "I see. No wonder the cultivators here wore all kinds of clothes." Mo Tiange raised her hand again and said with a smile, "Then can I see the manager of this place?" The cultivator repeatedly bowed. "I don't dare to accept Senior's greeting. The manager of our Qianmen Ridge happens to be a senior from Enchanting School. Since Senior is a disciple of Enchanting School, you can go meet him, it's in that main hall." "Is that so?" Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. She thought since this was Danding School's Mount Tianhua, the manager should also be a disciple of Danding School. "I don't dare to deceive Senior." Mo Tiange nodded and smiled at the cultivator. "Thank you." The cultivator repeatedly said he didn't dare. After saying goodbye to the cultivator, Mo Tiange slowly walked into the ruins. Outside the main hall, there were finally 2 cultivators guarding the gate. She didn't know which cultivation group they were from. Upon seeing her, one of them took a step forward and said respectfully, "Senior from Enchanting School, may I know if you have an identity tablet?" Mo Tiange was stunned. "What identity tablet?" The 2 disciples guarding the gate looked at each other strangely. The man continued to say, "It's the identity tablet of our Kunwu Alliance. Senior is a disciple of Enchanting School, so your master should have given you an identity tablet when you left the mountain." Mo Tiange smiled and said, "I see, but I don't have an identity tablet." Once she said that, the 2 disciples guarding the gate immediately became nervous. Mo Tiange smiled and continued to say, "I'm a disciple of Enchanting School who left the mountain 2 years ago. Because I was seriously injured in a battle, I've been recuperating in a secret place. I only came out now that I've recovered, so I don't have an alliance identity tablet you mentioned. However, I have an identity tablet of Enchanting School. You can also show it to your manager." As she said that, she handed over her Xianqing school identity tablet. The disciple guarding the gate saw her calm appearance and cautiously took the identity tablet. If that's the case, senior, please don't take offense. Please wait here for a moment. Seeing Mo Tiange nodding with a kind attitude, the disciple guarding the gate felt slightly relieved and went inside to report. Before long, Mo Tiange saw the disciple guarding the gate hurriedly running out. He cupped his hands towards her and said, "Senior, the manager wants to see you." Mo Tiange nodded with a smile, then stepped into the main hall. Although the outside of the main hall was half collapsed, the inside was still intact. However, the scene inside was beyond Mo Tiange's expectations. She originally thought since this was the location of the manager, it should be quiet, but she didn't expect it to be bustling with activity inside. There were actually a lot of people coming and going, and there were wounded people everywhere. It seemed to be a place for recuperation. "Xiao Bai." A somewhat familiar voice called out. Mo Tiange immediately saw a youth wearing Xianqing School's disciple uniform in the crowd. He was in the peak stage of the foundation building realm. His attitude was very cold, but every move he made was full of elegance. At this moment, he was squatting on the ground, examining the injuries of a cultivator. "Coming," an early stage foundation building youngster answered and came over. The youth raised his chin. "I'll leave this person to you." "All right." After handing the wounded person over to someone else, the youth stood up and leisurely took out a handkerchief to wipe his hands clean. He then picked up the identity tablet on the table and looked at Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange already recognized him. This was Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu, whom she met once at Luoyan Cliff. Kuang Zhu picked up her identity tablet and swept his scrutinizing gaze over her. However, this kind of scrutinizing didn't make people unhappy because his gaze was only cold and didn't contain any contempt. "Mo Tiange?" Mo Tiange raised her hand. "Yes." "Greetings to Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu." Kuang Zhu threw her identity tablet back to her and said, "Didn't you come to Danding School 2 years ago?" Mo Tiange was already prepared for this question. She explained, "2 years ago, I was seriously injured by a 5th-rank demonic beast during a battle with Yu clan. After I used a secret technique to escape, I lost consciousness. As a result, I was unconscious for several months. Several months later, I finally woke up. Because I was seriously injured, I didn't dare to show myself, so I found a secret place to hide and recuperate." Oh. It was unclear whether Kuang Zhu accepted her explanation or not. He turned around, walked around several tables, and rummaged through the tallest table. Finally, he found a blank identity tablet, engraved a few marks on it, and threw it to her. "This is your alliance's identity tablet. You just need to show it in the future." "Thank you, Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu." Mo Tiange took the new identity tablet and put it into her bag. However, when she saw Kuang Zhu bypassing her to take care of another wounded person, she hastily called out, "Senior Marshal Brother." Kuang Zhu didn't stop and continued to examine the injuries of the new wounded person. He faintly swept his gaze over her and asked, "What's the matter?" Mo Tiange was somewhat speechless at the scene in front of her. After a long time, she finally found her voice and asked, "Do I need to do anything?" "No need." This time, Kuang Zhu didn't even look at her. "You just need to mind your own business." Mo Tiange was a bit incredulous. "Isn't Senior Marshal Brother the person in charge here? Why aren't you assigning tasks?" Kuang Zhu snorted softly and said, "Tasks? Just go kill your demons. I'll inform you if there's anything." "Oh." Mo Tiange was puzzled, but no matter how puzzled she was, she knew this Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu didn't seem to want to be disturbed, so she asked him one last question. "Senior Marshal Brother, if I have something to ask, who should I ask?" After Kuang Zhu finished casting a healing spell, he raised his head to look at her. He then turned around and called out, "Xiaoguzi." "Yes." An aura-refining youngster answered and came over. Kuang Zhu pointed at her and said to the youngster, this martial uncle has something to ask. Since you have nothing to do, why don't you talk to her? Oh. The youngster glanced at Emotienga. His eyes wandered around before he said with a smile, Martial uncle, this isn't a good place to talk. Please come with me. Seeing that Kwang Zhu was once again engrossed in examining the injured, Emotienga felt helpless. But at least there was someone willing to answer her questions, so she smiled at the youngster and said, thank you. The youngster led her to a corner of the hall. She didn't know where he got 2 chairs with missing legs, but after casting a simple spell, he smiled and asked her to sit down. He then said, I don't dare to accept Martial Uncle's thanks. If Martial Uncle has anything to ask, please don't hesitate to ask me. I'm not bragging, but there's nothing I don't know about. Really? The youngster's attitude was neither servile nor overbearing, but he was smiling. Emotienga had a good impression of him, so she said with a smile, all right then. If you can answer me, I'll give you a good thing. What do you think? The youngster's eyes brightened. What good thing? Emotienga spread her hands. I obtained this by chance. If you need it, you can use it yourself. If you don't, it's not bad to exchange it for several hundred spirit stones. The youngster curiously picked up the snow-white medicinal pill in her palm. This. I don't know. Emotienga chuckled inwardly and said, in fact, I'm not sure what it's called, but it seems to be a medicinal pill to treat cultivation deviation. You can ask your elders. If you're lucky, it might be worth a lot of money, but if you're unlucky, don't blame me. This was the aura stabilizing pill she concocted. Among the medicinal pills she concocted, it was the least valuable one. The youngster chuckled and took the medicinal pill. All right, Martial Uncle, please ask what you want to ask. It seems you're really confident. Emotienga put the medicinal pill away before answering. The youngster played with the medicinal pill in his hand without saying anything. I want to ask you about a few people. The first is Martial Uncle Xianin from Clear Spring Peak, followed by several female disciples under him, and lastly, a disciple under Martial Uncle Qingyuan. The youngster's eyes shifted. Grandmaster Xianin was ordered to return to the mountain half a month ago, so he should be in Mount Taikang now. The female disciples under Grandmaster Martial Uncle mentioned should be Martial Uncle Han, Martial Uncle Wei, and Martial Uncle Luo, right? Correct. Emotienga nodded with a smile. This child really did have some skills. If Martial Uncle asked whether these 3 Martial Uncles are well or not, my answer would be not well. If Martial Uncle asked whether they're alive or not, my answer would be not well. Emotienga was stunned. This boy is really clever. But what does he mean by not well? The youngster seemed to have seen through her doubts, so he answered honestly, I heard what Martial Uncle said just now. I think Martial Uncle was with these 3 Martial Uncles 2 years ago, right? Seeing that Emotienga nodded, the youngster continued, in the battle that year, Grandmaster Xianin arrived in time, so the 3 Martial Uncles didn't die. However, Martial Uncle Wei and Martial Uncle Luo's injuries were quite serious, so they were sent back to Mount Taikang. This matter was handled by us. In addition, Martial Uncle Han is fine, but I heard she was also injured several months ago. Oh, I see. Emotienga heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that they were alive. Martial Uncle also mentioned Grandmaster Qingyuan's disciple. What's his name? His name is Yi Jingguan. Martial Uncle Yi? The youngster said with a smile, what a coincidence. Martial Uncle Yi has been with us recently, so you'll be able to see him soon. Chapter 129. Martial Uncle, you can be considered lucky. The youngster called Xiaoguzi continued to ramble on. In the war 2 years ago, Danding School was almost destroyed. Only some of its disciples managed to escape, but they were left homeless and miserable. That's why Mount Tianhua is now filled with disciples from other cultivation groups. At this point, Emotienga hastily interrupted him. Then how's Danding School now? Xiaoguzi was interrupted halfway. He paused for a moment before continuing. Oh, Danding School. Speaking of the war back then, it was really tragic. Later on, several 8th-rank demonic beasts launched a surprise attack. In the end, Danding School couldn't hold on and even lost a nascent soul cultivator. In the end, the remaining 2 nascent soul grandmasters of Danding School escaped from Mount Tianhua with their elite disciples. They even used the school's secret technique to preserve their lineage. Right now, Danding School's cultivators have settled in the nearby Mount Shiling. I heard that because of this, the nascent soul grandmasters of Danding School flew into a rage and blamed the other cultivation groups for not lending a helping hand. However, since Danding School has fallen to this point, they can only rely on the other 6 great cultivation groups and don't dare to really turn hostile. Xiaoguzi looked complacent as if Danding School's current predicament was caused by him, which made Mo Tiange feel a bit amused. However, the other 6 great cultivation groups probably had the same attitude as him. Now that Danding School was in such a state, not only did they suppress their strength, but they also preserved their lineage. In the future, Danding School still had to rely on them to make a comeback, so they naturally had to listen to them. Perhaps they might even directly turn Danding School into a cultivation group that concocted pills for them. That would be the best. Of course, Danding School wasn't easy to deal with. In any case, they had 2 nascent soul cultivators, so their foundation was still there. They still had a chance to rise again. Xiaoguzi's interest was piqued. Regardless of whether Mo Tiange asked him or not, he continued to talk non-stop. I say, Martial Uncle, you're also very awesome. I heard you were chased by a 5th-rank 2-headed eagle during that great battle, but you actually came out unscathed? Mo Tiange was a bit surprised. How did you know? Xiaoguzi's eyes widened. Martial Uncle, don't you know? Many people in Xianqing School know about your matter. Mo Tiange was stunned. What's going on? During the battle at Danding School that year, 2 5th-rank demonic beasts suddenly appeared among the foundation-building cultivators. In the end, one of them was lured away by Martial Uncle. After the battle, a lot of people said our Xianqing School disciples were really amazing. A middle-stage foundation-building cultivator was actually able to face a 5th-rank demonic beast alone. Xiaoguzi's face was full of envy, but he also said regretfully, unfortunately, when Grandmaster Xianin arrived and killed those 2 5th-rank demonic beasts, he couldn't find any trace of Martial Uncle. Many people thought Martial Uncle had fallen. Because of this, the school head even praised the disciples of Clear Spring Peak. Is that so? If that was the case, didn't that mean that she had become famous after a single battle? Xiaoguzi chuckled and nodded. Exactly. Martial Uncle, I recognized Senior Martial Brother Kuang Zhu's name as soon as you came in. I didn't expect Martial Uncle to be completely fine. This is great, you will definitely be rewarded by the sect when you return. Mo Tiange smiled faintly. She didn't care whether the sect would reward her or not. As long as the sect was satisfied with her, that was enough. By the way, Xiaoguzi said, Martial Uncle, since you're here, you're under the jurisdiction of our Qianmen Ridge Station. If you have any chores you need to do, you can just look for me and Xiaozui. As he spoke, he pointed at a young girl who was busying herself behind Xiaobai. Sure enough, she looked a bit like him. Thank you very much. Mo Tiange happened to have a matter she didn't know how to deal with. By the way, what do I need to do here? Where will I stay? Xiaoguzi answered, the cultivators in our station only need to go out to kill demonic beasts at least once a month. The rest of the time, we stay in the station. He then shouted, Xiaozui. Upon hearing his voice, the young girl behind Xiaobai hastily ran over. Brother, what's the matter? Xiaoguzi pointed at Mo Tiange. This is the new Martial Uncle. You should find a place for her to stay. Oh. Xiaozui bowed to Mo Tiange. After thinking for a moment, she explained, Martial Uncle, there aren't many female cultivators in our station, and we don't have many rooms either. If you don't mind, how about staying with me? Mo Tiange was only looking for a place to stay on the surface. When the time came, she would still have to enter the virtual sky world, so she naturally didn't want to live with other people. Thus, she said, if it's inconvenient to make arrangements, can I look for a place nearby? This. Xiaozue hesitated for a moment. She looked at her elder brother and said straightforwardly, if Martial Uncle doesn't mind, we naturally don't have any objections. However, I hope Martial Uncle can find a place in the station, lest there's any danger and we can't make it in time. Mo Tiange smiled. Of course. Before Xiaozue could say anything, the young man called Xiaobai gestured towards them. Xiaoguzi said, Xiaozue, you can go do your work. I'll accompany Martial Uncle to look around. Since he said that, Mo Tiange didn't refuse. Xiaozue hurriedly bowed and excused himself. After Xiaozue left, Xiaoguzi led Mo Tiange to the back of the mountain. When the two of them reached a secluded area, Xiaoguzi said, although it's a station, Kunwu Alliance is a place where several cultivation groups live together. The battle against demonic beasts has already reached this stage, so it's impossible for these cultivation groups to be completely harmonious. Martial Uncle, you're a disciple of Shenqing School, so there are several places we'd better avoid. Mo Tiange smiled. She didn't intend to delve into the matter of whether the alliance was harmonious or not. She just asked, right, doesn't senior martial brother Kuang Zhu manage things? Xiaoguzi smiled bitterly. Martial Uncle, you might not know, but senior martial brother Kuang Zhu mainly cultivates pill concocting and healing techniques. He doesn't like to meddle in these things, so I and my younger sister, Xiaozue, are in charge of miscellaneous matters. He and senior martial brother Bai are only responsible for treating the injured. Oh. This was indeed a strange relationship. From what he said, senior martial brother Bai seemed to be that early-stage foundation-building youngster, the one senior martial brother Kuang Zhu called Xiao Bai. Why were the two foundation-building cultivators only responsible for treating the injured while the aura-refining disciples were in charge of dispatching things? Having been away from worldly affairs for 2 years, Mo Tiange was a bit curious about this little disciple who seemed to know everything. She casually asked, you call him senior martial brother? Which martial uncle's disciple is he? Upon hearing what she said, Xiaoguzi's expression turned solemn. He scratched his head and said, Martial Uncle thinks too highly of me. Xiaozue and I are only ordinary disciples. We haven't entered any core formation grandmaster's tutelage. Since senior martial brother Bai is our sworn brother, we call him senior martial brother Kuang Zhu just like he did. Sworn brother. Sure enough, this was a strange relationship. Mo Tiange couldn't help but mutter, there are actually sworn brothers in the cultivation world? Upon hearing Mo Tiange's muttering, a solemn expression emerged on Xiaoguzi's cheeky face. He said very solemnly, senior martial brother Bai's kindness to me and my little sister is as heavy as a mountain. In my heart, he's not only my sworn brother, but he's also the most important person to me, Zhang Xiaogu. Upon seeing Mo Tiange's astonished expression, Xiaoguzi felt a bit embarrassed. He chuckled and said, in fact, this isn't a secret in our soul's retreat peak. If Martial Uncle doesn't feel bored, there's no harm in telling Martial Uncle about it. Hence, Xiaoguzi accompanied Mo Tiange as they walked around the station. As they walked, he introduced the predetermined areas of the several alliances and told her how he and senior martial brother Bai called each other sworn brother. Xiaoguzi's full name was Zhang Xiaogu, and Xiaozue was his twin sister, Zhang Xiaozue. Senior martial brother Kuang Zhu and Zhang Bai were both disciples of mortal clans. Their clans were friends for generations, and senior martial brother Kuang Zhu always took good care of Zhang Bai. Because of that, senior martial brother Kuang Zhu, who always treated people coldly, also affectionately called Zhang Bai, Xiao Bai. Senior martial brother Kuang Zhu and Zhang Bai met Xiaoguzi and Xiaoguzi not long after senior martial brother Kuang Zhu and Zhang Bai entered the sect and returned to the secular world to visit their relatives. At that time, the two of them were seriously ill and were on the verge of death in a dilapidated temple. When senior martial brother Bai examined the two of them, he discovered that the two of them possessed spiritual roots, so he simply picked them up and brought them back to the sect. If it wasn't for Senior Martial Brother Kwang Zhu's miraculous hands, the two of them probably wouldn't exist anymore. The reason the two of them were able to grow up to this age was because Senior Martial Brother Bai didn't hesitate to sacrifice his own cultivation time and raise them up bit by bit. Mo Tiange even sighed when she heard the two of them were orphans. However, Xiaoguzi straightened his back and retorted, "Who said I'm an orphan? Senior Martial Brother Kwang Zhu, Senior Martial Brother Bai, and my little sister are a very happy family." Mo Tiange couldn't help but laugh. She couldn't help but tease him. "Martial uncle originally wanted to give you some good things because you're an orphan. That being the case, Martial uncle's gifts are actually unnecessary." Sure enough, Xiaoguzi revealed a distressed expression. After struggling for a while, he finally said, "Compared to some good things, my family is more important." Xiaoguzi doesn't want to be an orphan. Upon hearing this, Mo Tiange couldn't help but recall Tianxiao, second uncle's voice, and second uncle's smile in the past. When Xiaoguzi saw her expression turn gloomy, he, who was used to observing people's expressions, immediately knew this martial uncle must have thought of someone, so he changed the subject. "We've been strolling around for a long time. I wonder if there's any place you like, martial uncle?" When he asked this question, the two of them happened to be standing in front of a stone house that could be considered quiet. Although it was a bit dilapidated, it could still be considered complete. Mo Tiange wasn't interested in strolling around anymore, so she said casually, "Then let's go here." Xiaoguzi took out a white jade tablet from his chinkuan bag and hung it on the stone house's door. He seemed a bit embarrassed that he made his martial uncle sad, so he hesitated for a moment before saying his goodbyes. Seeing that he still hadn't left after saying his goodbyes, Mo Tiange glanced at him. Xiaoguzi, who was usually eloquent, actually stuttered for a moment before he said, "If martial uncle feels bored living alone, you can come to my house to play." After he said that, he ran away like a wisp of smoke without waiting for Mo Tiange's response. Mo Tiange smiled. She looked at the dust-covered dilapidated house and felt a bit bored. She casually cleaned the dilapidated house, laid a defensive formation, and entered the virtual sky world. Once she entered the small house, the little inferno beast ran over unsteadily and moved closer to her, squeaking. Mo Tiange patted its head. She discovered that the little inferno beast seemed to want to drill into her spiritual beast pouch and was rubbing against her waist. Mo Tiange was stunned. "You want to go out?" The little inferno beast raised its head and whimpered, its eyes looking pitiful. Mo Tiange was silent for a long time. She stroked its head and sighed. Turns out even you can feel lonely. She had put this little inferno beast in the virtual sky world for more than 2 years. There were only some butterflies, flying insects, and other small things inside. There were no spiritual beasts, so it was normal for it to feel lonely. Wasn't she the same? Wasn't the reason why she participated in the demonic beast riot now because she was lonely? This kind of loneliness had nothing to do with Dao heart. Every living creature needed a bit of the aura of another living creature to feel the joy of living. However, this little inferno beast's reaction gave her some other ideas. "It's very dangerous outside. I can't take you out now, but I can bring some companions to accompany you. What do you think?" The little inferno beast raised its head, stared at her with its black eyes, and let out 2 happy cries. Mo Tiange smiled. She stroked its head, then went back to cultivating. Unexpectedly, Xiaoguzi's words during the day kept ringing in her mind, making her a bit absent-minded. Of course, since she was able to reach the middle stage of the foundation building realm in just a few breaths, the fluctuations in Mo Tiange's heart had already calmed down. At dawn, Missouri Tiange sensed a summoning talisman flying towards her from outside, so she stopped cultivating and came out of the virtual sky world. It was a summoning talisman from Xiaoguzi, saying that her name had been recorded in the list of cultivators who participated in the battle at Xianmen Ridge and that he would choose a time to report it to the school. There was also some information about the current war. Mo Tiange gave a simple reply after reading it, then packed up her things and left the room. Xiaoguzi said the fiercest battle was currently taking place in Tiandao Sec's area. Ever since Danding School was breached, Mount Tianhua became a forgotten place. Whether it was demonic beasts or cultivators, there weren't many demonic beasts or cultivators left here. Mo Tiange was tempted. Since that was the case, wouldn't it be safer for her to catch some small first-rank demonic beasts here? After notifying Xiaoguzi, she immediately took out the white silk handkerchief and flew towards the forest. Because of the fight of magical powers, the forest had decreased a lot. The demonic beasts that usually lived here were either killed or moved elsewhere. Mo Tiange used her divine sense to search for a long time, but she couldn't find any traces of demonic beasts. Mo Tiange simply stopped in midair and concentrated on searching with her divine sense. The coverage range of a foundation building cultivator's divine sense was several to dozens of miles. However, because she practiced the soul-refining art, Mo Tiange's divine sense was much stronger and could cover almost 50 miles. Right now, she was concentrating on searching. Gradually, she spread her divine sense and vaguely sensed spiritual aura fluctuations in the northeast. However, the spiritual aura fluctuations were already at the edge of the range of her divine sense, so she couldn't tell whether it was demonic beasts or cultivators. For Mo Tiange, who was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, a distance of 50 miles was nothing more than a moment. Since she couldn't sense anything else apart from that, she controlled the white silk handkerchief to fly northeast, determined to find out what was going on. When she was several dozen miles away from the spiritual aura fluctuations, out of caution, Mo Tiange released her divine sense again. Unexpectedly, when she probed, she was shocked. The spiritual aura fluctuations had nothing to do with demonic beasts, there were actually people fighting there. Among the spiritual aura fluctuations, the killing intent was undisguised, and the spiritual aura fluctuations of the people being besieged gave her a familiar feeling. Mo Tiange was startled. She drove the white silk handkerchief to speed up and rush towards the source of the spiritual aura fluctuations. Mo Tiange eliminated her senior martial sisters one by one in her mind. As for the people she was familiar with, she suddenly thought of one person, Yi Jingwen. Yesterday, Xiaoguzi told her that Martial Uncle Yi had been staying with us recently and that Martial Uncle would be able to see him soon. Apparently, what Xiaoguzi said about the internal strife in Kunwu Alliance was just a euphemism. Moreover, she and senior martial brother Yi hadn't seen each other for a long time, yet they were actually going to meet under these circumstances? She didn't know whether it was a blessing or a misfortune. Chapter 130. One Han gone. You and I are both disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups, so why did you ambush me? Yi Jingwen angrily glared at the 3 cultivators in front of him. The leader was about 30 or 40 years old. His facial features were decent, but he had a mustache, which made him look wretched. That person looked at Yi Jingwen and sneered. 7 great cultivation groups? Humph. Don't make it sound so dignified. You people from Xianqing School also took advantage of the situation to rob others. Now that the demonic beast riot has just been settled, who isn't taking advantage of the situation to make a profit? Yi Jingwen's complexion turned pale then red. He naturally knew that the 7 great cultivation groups weren't harmonious. Although he didn't do these things himself, he also knew about his fellow disciples. Although the 7 great cultivation groups belonged to the righteous path, there were always some people with unstable temperaments who took advantage of the situation to do something. For the sake of the overall situation, the sect always turned a blind eye to it. In the end, no matter which cultivation group it was, their foundation wasn't clean. After sizing Yi Jingwen up from head to toe, that person stroked his mustache and said to his fellow disciples with a mischievous smile, "After we finish this today, we'll take everything. This brat has a lot of good things on him." Of course. One of them stared at Yi Jingwen with a malicious expression. This brat killed a lot of demonic beasts these past few days. I reckon he has so many materials on him that he can't put them all away. Let's help him take them all. That's right. We're so kind-hearted, haha. The three people drew closer and closer, unsheathing their swords. As soon as Yi Jingwen saw them, his fingertips moved, unsheathing the sword on his back. Upon seeing this, the cultivator named Wan Hangan turned to his companion and laughed. Look at him. Our Gujin sect is a true sword cultivation group, yet he still wants to unsheath his sword in front of us. The three of them burst into laughter. Yi Jingwen's expression didn't change, but he still held several talismans in his hand. Xianqing School's cultivation technique was a Dao School's cultivation technique, but the techniques used in fights of magical power didn't stick to one pattern. There were talisman cultivators, medical cultivators, and sword cultivators in every sect, and Yi Jingwen was a sword cultivator disciple. However, Gujin's sect was the biggest sword cultivation group in Kunwu and had gathered the best sword cultivation talents in Kunwu. Pure sword cultivators had a slightly harder time advancing compared to ordinary cultivators, but in fights of magical power, they were stronger than cultivators in the same realm. Moreover, Gujin's sect had been practicing sword arts for generations, so they naturally had all kinds of secret techniques, so Yi Jingwen didn't dare to lower his guard. Of the three Gujin sect cultivators in front of him, one was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm and the other two were in the early stage of the foundation building realm. This middle stage foundation building cultivator was older than him, so he was naturally more experienced. If he cultivated some kind of secret technique, his chances of winning would be lower. As for those two early stage foundation building cultivators, he might be able to put up a fight. In an instant, Yi Jingwen had already made up his mind. He wasn't that conceited in a head-on fight, but he was certain that he could break out of the encirclement and escape. As long as he ran back to Qianmen Ridge Station, these people naturally wouldn't dare to make a move. The person in charge here was Senior Marshal Brother Guangzhu. Although this Senior Marshal Brother rarely made a move, he was a late-stage foundation building cultivator. Coupled with the other foundation building cultivators from his sect, they were more than enough to deter these people. Having made up his mind, he didn't wait for the three people to surround him. His sword suddenly shot out, thrusting straight at Wan Hangan. At the same time, he flipped the back of his hand and threw out a handful of talismans. The three cultivators were originally smiling, but as soon as they saw Yi Jingwen make a move, their expressions turned solemn. Wan Hangan wielded his sword and began to fight with Yi Jingwen. The other two cultivators also quickly stood together. The two of them raised their swords and formed a sword seal. A light barrier extended from their swords and instantly surrounded the two of them. When the talismans landed on their bodies, they were bounced off by the light barrier. Upon seeing this, Yi Jingwen inwardly felt that it was a pity. The talisman crafting technique was quite difficult. Most of the talismans used by foundation building cultivators were bestowed by their masters, and they had to craft them themselves. There were at least 3 to 5 talismans in this handful, yet these two foundation building cultivators were actually able to dodge them so easily. Gujin Sek's strength was indeed well deserved. However, he also believed that he wasn't a pushover. Ever since he entered the sect at a young age, he went from being an ordinary young disciple to an inner disciple, then to an inner disciple, from the aura refining realm to the foundation building realm, and then to the middle stage of the foundation building realm in a short time. Even if they wanted to take him down, it wouldn't be that easy. After several exchanges, Wan Hangan was in a somewhat difficult situation. In the same station, he naturally saw Yi Jingwen make a move, but he never expected that this brat was actually this strong. He wasn't any weaker than their Gujin sect's elite sword cultivators. He took back his flying sword and shouted in a threatening manner, "Brat, quickly take out that thing and we'll spare your life." Upon hearing this, Yi Jingwen, whose sleeve had just been cut, smiled bitterly and said, "What? Are you afraid of death?" If he really couldn't escape, Wan Hangan might not be able to survive even if he put his life on the line. Yi Jingwen was already in this kind of situation, yet he still wasn't willing to lower his head. Wan Hangan was stunned for a moment before anger welled up in his heart. He glanced at his two companions. When the two Gujin sect disciples saw his glance, they immediately changed directions and stepped in different directions. Yi Jingwen's expression froze when he heard Wan Honggan say with a sneer, "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I'll show you our Gujian sect's thousand-shaped star formation." The three of them stood in three different directions around Yi Jingwen. Each of them raised their swords and closed their eyes to recite the incantation. Upon seeing this, Yi Jingwen immediately took back his flying sword and cautiously observed his surroundings. The thousand-shaped star formation was Gujian sect's consummate sword formation. It required at least 3 people and at most 10 million people. Once it was laid, it would be filled with killing intent. However, this sword formation wasn't easy to lay. It required an unimaginable amount of spiritual aura, so these 3 people definitely wouldn't have it easy. Without waiting for the 3 of them to lay down the sword array, Yi Jingwen swung his hand and the sword flew out of his hand, seemingly shooting towards Wan Honggan. Just as they moved to parry, he pinched a spirit talisman and patted it, instantly disappearing into the ground. Earth Escape. It's an Earth Escape talisman. Wan Honggan shouted. With a wave of his hand, a beam of sword aura flew out of his hand and shot into the ground. A beam of spiritual aura visible to the naked eye quickly escaped into the distance. Chase. Mo Tiange stood on the white silk handkerchief with the shuttle of flying Apsara in her hand. She no longer restrained her momentum, so the spiritual aura of a foundation-building cultivator immediately spread out. At the same time, the shuttle of flying Apsara moved, directly taking the leader's head. That person shouted, "Who?" He turned around and barely avoided the shuttle of flying Apsara. When he saw a few strands of hair floating down, he was so frightened that he broke out in a cold sweat. Mo Tiange coldly said, "Who are you? You actually dared to besiege my Xianqing school's senior martial brother." When the 3 people saw her appearance, they glanced at each other. She was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. At this moment, Yi Jingwen had already come out of the ground. He called out in pleasant surprise, "Tiange." Seeing that the 3 people already had the intention to leave, Mo Tiange snorted and moved her shuttle of flying Apsara once again. Several flying needles were hidden inside the golden light. At the same time, her substantial divine sense quietly spread out. Yi Jingwen's reaction was also very fast. With a wave of his hand, his flying sword flew out once again. Together with her shuttle of flying Apsara, they blocked the 2 early-stage foundation-building cultivators' counterattack. All of this happened in a flash. They didn't have time to lay their thousand-shaped star formation. Wan Honggan only had time to move aside and dodge before he heard an "ah," and one of his companions fell to the ground. He turned his head to look. His other companion's complexion was ashen as he barely blocked Yi Jingwen's flying sword. Wan Honggan touched the talisman on his waist and slapped it on his body. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. He actually completely ignored his companion and fled. Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen didn't chase after him. Instead, they once again attacked the early-stage foundation-building cultivator. With 2 middle-stage cultivators attacking together and the other party still in a state of panic, how could he resist? He was killed on the spot just like that. After the fight ended, Yi Jingwen glanced in the direction Wan Honggan fled, then put away his sword. He turned to Mo Tiange and said, "Tiange, why are you here? I heard you went missing during the battle at Danding School 2 years ago. Were you okay afterward?" Mo Tiange nodded at him and said with a smile, "Big brother Yi, look at me. Do I look like I'm okay?" Yi Jingwen was stunned. He sized her up and said in astonishment, "You advanced to the middle stage?" Mo Tiange was baffled by his question. "I advanced to the middle stage 2 years ago." "Big brother Yi, you didn't know?" "Huh?" Yi Jingwen was confused. "What's going on?" Mo Tiange glanced at the ground and said, "Big brother Yi, let's go back and talk about it slowly." "All right." The 2 of them disposed of the corpses of the 2 Gujian sect disciples, then slowly flew back together. "Tiange, tell me what happened to you first. From what I remember, you only built your foundation 3 years ago, so how did you advance to the middle stage 2 years ago? What happened to you when you went missing?" I encountered some fated chances 2 years ago, so I directly advanced to the middle stage. At that time, all the martial sisters at Luo Yen Cliff knew about it, so I thought you also knew. At that time, I was outside with my master. When we returned, you had already left with martial uncle Xianin. The fated chance you encountered actually allowed you to advance to the middle stage? That wasn't an ordinary fated chance. Mo Tiange smiled but didn't explain in detail. She then said, 2 years ago, I was chased by a 5th-ranked demonic beast. Fortunately, I had an escape magic tool on me, so I actually managed to escape. Later, because I was injured, I didn't dare to show myself, so I found a secret place to heal my injuries. It was only after my injuries healed a few days ago that I dared to come out. So it was like that. You spent 2 years recuperating. Your injuries must be very serious, right? Mo Tiange said, fortunately, I was unconscious for several months. Fortunately, I didn't encounter any danger. Big brother Yi, how come you're here? A bitter smile appeared on Yi Jingwen's face. These past 2 years were really tragic. Because the order to seal the mountain was issued early on, the aura refining disciples weren't affected, so the impact wasn't very big. However, almost a third of the foundation building disciples died, which shook the school's foundation. A third of the foundation building disciples was equivalent to at least 70 to 80 disciples. With so many foundation building disciples, it would take at least 100 years for them to regain their vitality. As for the other cultivation groups, this time, they could be considered disastrous. In the beginning, us elite disciples followed Master into battle, but later, because of various missions or crises, we were scattered all over the place. The reason I was in Mount Heavenly Fire was because I was sent to support Danding School after the big battle 2 years ago. After that, I couldn't go back. The two of them talked about some things that happened during the demonic beast riot. Mo Tiange learned that Xianqing School lost 3 core formation cultivators later on. The school's head Grand Supreme Elder was furious, so 2 of its 5 nascent soul cultivators went to battle. Only then was the situation in the vicinity of Xianqing School stabilized. After 3 years of fighting, the demonic beast riot could be considered quelled. There were no longer countless demonic beasts in the forest, and the strength of cultivation groups in Kunwu, big and small, was almost exhausted. Yi Jingwen said the scale of the battle this time surpassed the previous ones. He reckoned there wouldn't be another battle with demonic beasts for the next 100 years. Because of this, Mo Tiange secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, she hid inside the virtual sky world for 2 years. Otherwise, not to mention whether she could have kept her life, she would have ended up like her 3 senior martial sisters. She was afraid her cultivation would have stagnated for several years due to numerous injuries. Tiange, you're really lucky. You're not even 30 yet, but you're already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Big brother really envies you. Mo Tiange shook her head. It's just a fated chance. Fated chances are also part of one's strength. You don't have to be so modest. The two of them chatted all the way to Qianmen Ridge Station. After working together just now, Yi Jingwen had a new understanding of the current Mo Tiange. The Mo Tiange in front of him was already a genuine middle-stage foundation building cultivator. The accuracy of her attacks and the decisiveness of her schemes showed that she was no longer the little girl he saved back then. He couldn't help but sigh with emotion. It had only been 17 years. When he saved that little girl back then, he never thought this day would come so quickly. She had already grown to the point where she could fight side by side with him. Tiange, you have to be careful. Gujin Sek's thousand-shaped star formation is very difficult to deal with. It's best to kill them before they arrange the sword formation. Otherwise, we'll disturb them. If we can't do anything by the time they arrange the sword formation, we'll have to run away immediately. Big brother Yi, you should also be careful. The two of them waited in silence for a while before they exchanged glances. They then walked into the station together. When Mo Tiange's divine sense spread out, she immediately bumped into another person's divine sense. She didn't know who this divine sense belonged to. She didn't provoke it, but she also didn't avoid it. When they stepped into the main hall, it was completely quiet inside. The wounded had already been moved away. Several Gujian sect cultivators were standing together, looking at them with hostility. Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue were at the back of the group, while Zhan Bai was in front of them. Kuang Zhu was sitting in front of a table, concocting some kind of ointment as if nothing else was there. Mo Tiange looked at Xiaoguzi. She saw this child glancing at the Gujian sect cultivators before winking at them. She and Yi Jingwen exchanged glances. It seemed senior martial brother Kuang Zhu agreed. Chapter 131. The hall was quiet. Only the clinking of bottles and jars could be heard as Kuang Zhu concocted ointments. Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen stood in front of Zhan Bai and looked at the Gujian sect cultivators. Both of them looked very calm, but it was precisely this calmness that made them unable to calm down. Wan Honggan had seen their methods, and Kuang Zhu was the only late-stage foundation building cultivator, so he couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. He turned to look at his fellow disciples, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed across his eyes. He stood up and shouted, "Senior martial brother Kuang, these are the two people who tried to kill my fellow disciples. Please give our Gujian sect an explanation." Upon hearing his voice, Kuang Zhu raised his head and glanced at him, but he still lowered his head and kept stirring. Wan Honggan was a bit embarrassed by his reaction, so he said angrily, "Kuang Zhu. What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" The one who spoke was Zhan Bai, who usually didn't talk much. He glanced at them coldly and said calmly, "What do you mean by saying these words? Is it necessary to say it and make everyone lose face?" Wan Honggan was immediately angered by his rude words. "You," Mo Tiange looked up and showed a sarcastic smile. What a joke. Everyone knew what was going on. Wouldn't it be better to speak frankly? In the end, a fight was inevitable, so why were you still pretending? Wan Honggan turned to look at his fellow disciples, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed across his eyes. In an instant, the 5 Gujian sect cultivators in black drew their swords and changed their positions. As soon as Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen saw this, they each used their magic tools to interfere with their positions. Mo Tiange's shuttle of flying Apsara was nimble and erratic. As soon as she made her move, she rushed towards one of the early-stage foundation building cultivators. At the same time, she threw several flying needles. Yi Jingwen's flying sword went straight to Wan Honggan. Once the two of them made their moves, their positions were disrupted. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange shook her hand and shot out countless flying needles. Unfortunately, this place was too small, so they couldn't use talismans. This wasn't a loss for sword cultivators, but for ordinary cultivators like them, it weakened part of their strength. "Stand still. I'll block them," Wan Honggan shouted. Yi Jingwen sneered. "Can you block them?" Xianqing School's disciples weren't pure sword cultivators, and Yi Jingwen was no exception. His flying sword flew out, and he was holding a kind of magic tool in his hand. He aimed it at Wan Honggan. It turned out that he was intercepted by Wan Honggan, and now the villain was the first to accuse him. Therefore, his hatred toward Wan Honggan grew, and each and every one of his moves was aimed at him. Mo Tiange swept a glance at him. No matter how Zhan Bai blocked the sword auras, wounds still appeared on Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue's bodies. Mo Tiange couldn't help but feel furious. She withdrew the white silk handkerchief and the shuttle of flying Apsara. She then released her divine sense, preparing to directly kill them. Right at that moment, she saw a piece of cloth flashing in front of her eyes. In the blink of an eye, she saw Kuang Zhu standing in front of them. With a shake of his sleeves, countless powder-like substances flew out of his sleeves and gradually interweaved into a net. The seemingly thin powder fog actually blocked their flying swords. When the powder fog subsided, Wan Honggan, who was covered in white powder, shouted angrily, "Kuang Zhu." The corners of Kuang Zhu's mouth curled up slightly. Even though he was angry, he still acted elegantly. Scram! This place can't keep you. This time, not only one Han gone, but the other Gujin sect cultivators also looked angry. Another person shouted, Kwang Zhu, what right do you have to drive us away? Kwang Zhu snorted coldly. He didn't hide his disgust at all. Because of your lives. It's fine if you fight in the dark, I'll just turn a blind eye and pretend I didn't see it. But since you've actually made a fuss out in the open, we'll shed all pretense of cordiality. We don't need to play this game anymore. You, Wan Hong'an's face twisted. Don't think you're so amazing just because you're in the late stage of the foundation building realm. There are so many of us, so we might not necessarily lose to you. Kwang Zhu smiled lightly. If you say one more word, I'll take your lives. This sounded like a threat, and the Gujin sect cultivators also understood it that way. However, Kwang Zhu's ice-cold expression was filled with a deathly aura, making them speechless. The last one to break the silence was Yi Jingwen. He took a step forward and said, Senior Marshal Brother Kwang, you have good intentions. Normally, I should listen to you, but I want to keep all of them here. Anger once again appeared on Wan Hong'an's face, but there was also a hint of timidity. In fact, he already felt a bit regretful. He thought he could gain the upper hand by relying on his sword cultivator's ability in fights of magical powers, but he didn't expect that these people weren't mediocre. He knew Kwang Zhu and Yi Jingwen were strong, but he didn't expect that the new female cultivator from Xianqing School would also be so strong. These three people's realms were higher than theirs, so even if sword cultivators were strong in fights of magical powers, their odds of winning were still pitifully small. Kwang Zhu cast an indifferent glance at Yi Jingwen. If you want to kill, then just do it. It'll save me the trouble of looking at you. Yi Jingwen smiled and gently cupped his hands towards him. He then turned his head to look at Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange returned his gaze with a smile. The two of them each took out their flying swords or magic tools, exuding killing intent. Chapter 132. When Kwang Zhu saw the two of them brimming with killing intent, he retreated. Together with Zhan Bai, he stood in front of Xiaoguzi and Xiaozui to protect them. Right after that, he used moving shadows and brought the two aura-refining cultivators to the entrance of the main hall. Upon seeing this, the smiles on Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange's faces grew wider. Senior Marshal Brother Kwang Zhu solved Xiaoguzi's and Xiaozui's worries and even sealed their escape route. What else did they have to worry about? In contrast, the expressions of the Gujin sect cultivators were even more unsightly. Unexpectedly, Kwang Zhu seemed to feel that he hadn't dealt enough damage to their morale. Indifferently and elegantly, he said something that should have been full of killing intent. We'll send them on their way sooner or later, so we better hurry up. Right after he finished speaking, an impatient early-stage foundation-building cultivator from Gujin sect shouted, Don't go too far. Then he rushed towards Kwang Zhu with bloodshot eyes. When that early-stage foundation-building cultivator rushed towards them, Wan Hong'an shouted, Lay the formation. But in the end, he was still one step too late. An early-stage foundation-building cultivator against a late-stage foundation-building cultivator, that cultivator naturally didn't have any chance of winning. Even when the sword light, which was almost solid, was about to pierce Kwang Zhu's head, it was wrapped up by a powdery substance scattered by Kwang Zhu's casual wave of his sleeve. The fact that the seemingly thin pink mist could block the flying sword as if it was solid was already shocking enough. Now, it actually entangled the sword that was fused with the sword cultivator's divine sense like thorns. Not only the Gujin sect cultivators, but even Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen were also quite astonished. Because of Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen's surprise, the Gujin sect cultivators who were subconsciously laying the sword formation were about to finish. Kwang Zhu's calm and elegant voice said, I'll help you lay it for a while. His voice still lingered in the air when that early-stage foundation-building cultivator crashed into the almost complete sword formation like a kite with a broken string, dragging a thin layer of powder behind him. When the other middle-stage foundation-building cultivator from Gujin sect saw his fellow disciple crashing into him, he naturally reached out to catch him and easily caught him. However, no one noticed that the powder also attached itself to that cultivator's body. Kwang Zhu's action naturally reminded Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange, who were somewhat distracted. Mo Tiange hastily controlled the shuttle of flying Apsara to collide with another early-stage foundation building cultivator who was standing on the star position of the sword formation. That cultivator naturally didn't dare to take this collision head-on, so he had no choice but to give up the star position he managed to stand on after much difficulty. Moreover, he was also injured by the flying needles Mo Tiange shot during the chaos. Wan Honggan was so angry that he gnashed his teeth. Since he couldn't lay a formation, he could only attack them one by one. Thinking that since they were both middle-stage foundation building cultivators, the female cultivator would naturally be easier to deal with, Wan Honggan used two of his fingers to swipe the blade of his sword. A streak of dark red blood seeped into his sword. At the same time, Wan Honggan switched his sword-wielding hand to his injured left hand. Right after that, numerous flying blades formed from sword aura flew towards Mo Tiange, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Senior Martial Brother Wan, you. The youngest early-stage foundation building cultivator from Gujin's sect was greatly alarmed. Mo Tiange was very vigilant towards these unusual blood blades. The white silk handkerchief hovering above her head quickly formed a brick wall in front of her. Unexpectedly, the blood blades at the edge of the brick wall bypassed the brick wall and went straight towards Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange retreated rapidly while controlling her body-protecting true aura to expand. Unexpectedly, her body-protecting true aura only slightly slowed down the speed of the blood blades. Two of the blood blades, which she couldn't dodge in time, pierced Mo Tiange's left shoulder and calf with 2 slashes. Seeing that his attack had succeeded, Wan Honggan grinned malevolently. Xiao Gaiji, if you want to live today, you have to risk your life first. Do you still think you can escape unscathed? Upon hearing Wan Honggan's words, the young cultivator named Xiao Gaiji also injured himself as a sacrifice to the sword just like Wan Honggan. When the 3 Gujin sect cultivators who were fighting with Yi Jingwen saw this movement, they also cooperated and injured themselves as a sacrifice to the sword just like Wan Honggan. For a moment, the blood blades danced chaotically. Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange were suppressed to the point where they couldn't control the situation. As for the 5 people from Gujin sect, they relied on the blood blades to open a path and once again tried to lay a formation. A sneer appeared on the corners of Kwang Zhu's mouth. After pushing his hand away, he took out the bottle of medicinal pills he had been fiddling with before the battle. He poured out several bluish-green pills, then raised his hand and threw them towards the center of the battlefield. The people from Gujin sect naturally dodged in panic, but Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen, who were being attacked, weren't so lucky. Since it was already too late to dodge, the two of them had no choice but to take this attack head-on. Unexpectedly, the pills turned into a mist the moment they came into contact with their protective true aura. The mist then flowed along the blood aura that overflowed from their wounds during the fight and entered their wounds. Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen were startled by the coolness that entered their bodies. When they looked again, their wounds were actually healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After Kwang Zhu threw the pills, he didn't stop. The green mist swirled around the battlefield and the blood blades disappeared in an instant. The Gujin sect cultivators stared at their healed fingers in astonishment. Their fighting prowess had decreased sharply. Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was the first time they learned medical cultivators' treatment could also be used as a means of attack. Senior Martial Brother Kwang smiled gently and said, "Today, I can be considered to have reached a higher level." Wan Honggan's ferocious expression didn't change as he revealed a smile. "This bleeding stopped just in time, so I won't thank you." Right after he finished speaking, he actually hit his own chest with his palm and spat out a mouthful of blood from his heart onto the ground in the center of the main hall. In an instant, the messy traces left on the ground by the blood blades unexpectedly squirmed as if they were alive. Wan Honggan burst into frenzied laughter. "Since I can't lay the 1,000-shape star formation, I'll let you have a taste of our Gujin sect's 1,000 shapes Azura formation." Ha 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 ha. The expression of another middle-stage foundation building cultivator from Gujian sect changed greatly. Wan Han Gan, you're crazy. You even dared to learn our sect's forbidden technique and even tricked us. The blood blades on the ground naturally weren't something Wan Han Gan could create by himself. Wan Han Gan, who clearly knew he had no way out, not only did he use his own body as a sacrifice to kill his opponent, but he also directly used his fellow disciples as blood mediums for the Thousand Shapes Azura formation. Wan Han Gan stared at the rapidly squirming bloodstains on the ground in the main hall. He laughed until his strength was almost exhausted, but he still said, "Since you can't live, follow me to hell." Ha 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 ha. The expressions of the Gujian sect cultivators changed. Before Mo Tiange could figure out what was going on, Kuang Zhuqing, who was standing at the door, shouted, "Xiao Bai, Dharma Protector." In just a breath's time, the bloodstains under Wan Hong'an's feet formed a circle with him as the center. Then, with this circle as the center, they changed into words that emitted a gloomy aura and rapidly spread outwards. Kuang Zhuqing, who was sitting cross-legged, pushed his palms forward. A cloud of white fog rapidly spread from where he stood towards the place where Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange were standing. That white fog also managed to stop the spreading of the bloody words in time. When the Gujian sect cultivators saw that white fog, they acted as if they saw a life-saving straw. They wanted to rush over, but they only had enough time to rush halfway before the spreading bloody words enveloped their bodies and froze them in place. Mo Tiange watched in horror as the frozen Gujian sect cultivators' faces rapidly turned pale. The bloody words on the ground became even more vigorous and spread towards the walls of the main hall, as well as the area covered by Kuang Zhuqing's white fog. Seeing senior martial brother Kuang Zhuqing, who was controlling the white fog to resist the bloody words, Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen glanced at each other. They naturally knew the key at this moment was Wan Han Gan. Mo Tiange was about to take out her magic tool and give Wan Han Gan, who was laughing himself hoarse, a fatal blow when Xiao Bai shouted, "You can't." Mo Tiange looked over with a puzzled expression. Xiaoguzi poked his head out from behind senior martial brother Bai, who was guarding them. He said, "This Thousand Shapes Azura formation can only be slightly restrained by incorporeal objects like senior martial brother. Once it encounters a solid object, it'll use the solid object as a catalyst." Xiaoguzi paused for a moment, unable to find the right words. He could only point at the Gujian sect cultivators who were being used as blood mediators and say, "It'll become like that." Yi Jingwen also explained, "The blood ring under his feet looks like it's only on the ground, but if someone really attacks him, it'll form a pillar from the ground to resist the attack. At the same time, it'll use the attacker's catalyst as a blood mediator." Yi Jingwen then said, "The Thousand Shapes Azura formation is an extremely vicious blood-refining formation. This formation shocked the world several hundred years ago during the demonic beast war. However, because its destructive power was too great and the owner of the blood-refining formation was prone to demonization, it was listed as a forbidden technique by Gujian sect. However, Tiange, you didn't grow up in West Kunwu, so it's reasonable that you don't know about it." In such a critical situation, Yi Jingwen was still in the mood to explain that he didn't grow up in West Kunwu, so it was reasonable that he didn't know about it. This made Mo Tiange speechless. While Mo Tiange's mind was racing, she suddenly heard Yi Jingwen nagging in her ear. "Tiange, you're proficient in formations. If there's an illusory beast inside the formation, you can attack. However, this place is too small, and formation discs and the like are also solid objects." "What a pity." Mo Tiange was delighted. "Illusory beasts?" Yi Jingwen nodded. "Anything without a solid object is fine." Mo Tiange asked again, "Then divine sense is also fine?" Yi Jingwen smiled bitterly. "Of course. However, when it comes to divine sense, sword cultivators also cultivate their divine sense while cultivating their swords. Even senior martial brother Kuang, who's in the late stage of the foundation building realm, might not necessarily be able to defeat the divine sense of a middle stage foundation building sword cultivator." Mo Tiange thought that with the soul refining art, she wouldn't be an ordinary cultivator anymore. Nevertheless, the soul-refining art was Tianga's only trump card, so she naturally didn't want to expose the secret of her powerful divine sense in front of so many people. Thus, she took advantage of Yi Jingwen's previous words about being proficient in formations to say, formations can also be big or small. We might as well give it a try. Yi Jingwen didn't know much about formations, so he didn't doubt Tianga's words at all. He said happily, in that case, let's give it a try quickly. However, he didn't know that formations that could summon illusory beasts were all complicated big formations. Just the eye of the formation alone wasn't something a few people could set up. Judging from Kuang Zhu's expression, Tianga knew Xiaobai and Kuang Zhu wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. She didn't dare to hesitate, took out several spirit stones from her Qingquan bag, laid a metal element formation that could sense spiritual aura, and said to Yi Jingwen, "Senior Marshal Brother Yi, I'll have to trouble you to protect me." Yi Jingwen was very anxious. He also didn't know why laying a formation required protection, so he just nodded and agreed. Tianga quickly released her divine sense, using the soul-refining art's only divine sense technique to kill the defenseless one Hong'an's primordial spirit. A primordial spirit was naturally weaker than a tyrannical body, let alone a defenseless primordial spirit. Once the soul-refining art was used, it would naturally be a one-hit kill. Kuang Zhu felt his body lighten. When he opened his eyes, he saw Wan Hong'an lying on the ground. The blood-refined characters around him also lost control and rushed towards Wan Hong'an's body. Kuang Zhu hastily clasped his palms together. The white fog only had enough time to block several people before Wan Hong'an's body exploded and died. The power of a foundation-building cultivator's body explosion was so great that it actually raised the main hall of Qianmen Ridge to the ground. As for the several Gujian sect cultivators outside Kuang Zhu's white fog, they didn't die directly from the Thousand Shapes Azura formation, but they also died from the formation's backlash. When the aftermath of the explosion subsided, Senior Marshal Brother Kuang Zhu, with his sleeves fluttering in the wind, stood on top of the ruins. He glanced at the cultivators from other cultivation groups who rushed over but didn't say anything. Yi Jingwen and Tianga naturally wouldn't explain, but these foundation-building cultivators weren't fools. Their divine senses had been paying attention to this place, so they could roughly figure out what happened. Thousand Shapes Azura Formation. This is the Thousand Shapes Azura Formation, someone muttered to himself. However, even though he was muttering to himself, the hearing of foundation-building cultivators was sharp enough to hear him clearly. They couldn't help but turn pale. Right now, they could still feel the aftermath of the Thousand Shapes Azura Formation. Although they didn't know why the Thousand Shapes Azura Formation was activated, the fact that he was able to break the Thousand Shapes Azura Formation showed how powerful this medical cultivator, who rarely made a move, was. The several big friendly cultivation groups of Gujian sect inside Qianmen Ridge Station naturally didn't dare to rashly stick their heads out. As for the remaining Gujian sect cultivators who didn't have a single foundation-building cultivator left, they were even more tight-lipped. 5 foundation-building cultivators died inside Qianmen Ridge Station all of a sudden. Even under normal circumstances, this wasn't something that could be glossed over with just a few words. Moreover, after the demonic beast war, Gujian's sect also lost a large number of foundation-building cultivators. Coupled with the 2 early-stage foundation-building cultivators Tianga and Yi Jingwen killed outside the station, Gujian's sect actually lost 7 foundation-building cultivators in this internal strife. When this matter was spread to the sect head of Gujian's sect was furious. He actually didn't hesitate to travel thousands of miles straight to Qianmen Ridge Station, wanting to behead Kuang Zhu and the others who were directly involved in this matter. Among the 6 people in the room, 4 were foundation-building cultivators and 2 were aura-refining cultivators. We'd better leave quickly. If this matter spreads out, their Gujian sect cultivators will definitely rush over here. At that time, we'll be in trouble. That won't do. Big brother, we've already alarmed a core formation grandmaster. How can we escape? Then what should we do? We can't just sit here and wait for them to kill us, can we? Even if we want to run, we can't. The 4 foundation building cultivators didn't say a word, while the 2 aura refining cultivators chattered. Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue argued for a long time, but neither of them could convince the other. In the end, the 2 of them squatted on the side and compared their eyesight. Kuang Zhu swept his gaze over them and said, "I've already informed the sect head about this matter, so you don't need to worry about it anymore." Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue turned their heads at the same time and widened their eyes. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" They argued for a long time until their mouths were dry from all the talking. Kuang Zhu lightly answered, "You didn't ask." The 2 of them were speechless and both snorted angrily. The 2 children were so angry that they stopped talking. Zhan Bai looked at them helplessly, then turned to Kuang Zhu. "Senior martial brother, how will the sect head handle this matter?" Kuang Zhu held a cup of tea and said, "I called you here to talk about this matter." Yi Jingwen put down his tea and said, "Senior martial brother Kuang, junior martial brother Zhan, this matter started because of me, so you don't need to feel embarrassed. Just tell me directly." Before he made the killing move, he already thought about the consequences. No matter what, the sect head would protect their disciples, so in the end, it would still become a showdown between the 2 groups. In this demonic beast riot, every cultivation group suffered heavy losses, and Gujian's sect's strength was also greatly damaged. Although Xianqing School also lost a lot of foundation building disciples, it still retained its basic strength because it sealed off the mountain. Between the 2 groups, Xianqing School still won. Besides, Grand Master Jinghe had a murderous temperament and was extremely protective of his disciples. If he found out his Clear Spring Peak disciples did this kind of thing, he would definitely clap his hands and laugh heartily instead of punishing them. With Grand Master Jinghe's protection, what was there for him to be afraid of? Nevertheless, Kuang Zhu said faintly, "No, I think it's better if you don't say it directly." Yi Jingwen was puzzled. "Why?" Kuang Zhu's gaze circled around the scene and finally landed on Mo Tiange, who was quietly drinking tea. "We might as well push this matter onto junior martial sister Mo." Once he said that, not only were Mo Tiange, Yi Jingwen, and Zhan Bai stunned, but even Xiaoguzi and Xiaozue, who were squatting angrily, raised their heads. Yi Jingwen blurted out again, "Why?" Kuang Zhu didn't answer and just lowered his head to drink his tea. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, quickly calmed down and nodded. "Okay." Yi Jingwen was even more surprised and turned to Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange smiled and said softly, "Big brother Yi, have you forgotten my identity in the school?" Yi Jingwen was stunned, but then he suddenly understood. "You mean, junior martial sister Mo is Grand Master Jinghe's registered disciple?" Kuang Zhu took over the conversation. "What junior martial brother Yi said just now is very reasonable, but for the same reason, it's more appropriate for junior martial sister Mo to come forward. Grand Master Jinghe indeed had that kind of temperament." However, Yi Jingwen and Mo Tiange, on the other hand, were separated by a layer. Since Mo Tiange was Grand Master Jinghe's registered disciple, it was reasonable for Grand Master Jinghe to come forward. Even if Grand Master Jinghe didn't come forward, Martial Uncle Xianyin, who had the most seniority in Clear Spring Peak, would come forward. That way, not only would the others be safe, but Mo Tiange wouldn't necessarily have any mishaps. After thinking about all this, Yi Jingwen couldn't help but sigh inwardly. This senior martial brother Kuang Zhu looks cold, indifferent, and aloof from worldly affairs, but his mind is so meticulous and his vision is also so sinister. Thinking about this, Yi Jingwen suddenly felt a chill on his back. Isn't this the same as scheming against a nascent soul grandmaster? Although he sensed Yi Jingwen's strange gaze, Kuang Zhu's expression was still calm. Mo Tiange, on the other hand, pondered for a moment then said, "That being the case, we might as well go all the way. We'll just say they wanted to kill me and rob me of my treasures. Moreover, they even harbored improper thoughts and didn't let me off after they failed. Senior martial brother Kuang Zhu, does this mean I can get some benefits from Grand Master Jinghe?" Yi Jingwen felt even colder on his back. Based on Grand Master Jinghe's temperament, if his disciple was plotted against but was able to counterattack and kill the plotters, not only would he not blame her, but he would also reward her greatly. Mo Tiange chuckled softly, then turned towards Yi Jingwen and said, "Big brother Yi, if I get any benefits, I naturally won't keep them to myself." Before Yi Jingwen could answer, he heard Kuang Zhu's voice, "Then what about us?" Mo Tiange's gaze fell on Xiaoguzi and Xiaozui's sparkling eyes in the corner. She smiled and said, "Of course we'll get both." Yi Jingwen was drenched in a cold sweat. He thought he was vicious and merciless, but he never expected these people to be much bolder than him. Not only did they want to scheme against a nascent soul grandmaster, but they also wanted to divide the spoils in advance. Kuang Zhu smiled and took out a summoning talisman. "In that case, I'll have to thank Junior Martial Sister Mo's generosity in advance." The sect head replied that Grandmaster Jinghe is already on his way here. Aside from Yi Jingwen and Zhan Bai, the other foundation building cultivators of Xianqing School also approached Kuang Zhu. The other cultivators of the 7 major sects watched from afar. Kuang Zhu stopped in front of Qianmen Ridge's main gate. He cupped his fists and said, "Reverend Lu Feng has come from afar. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." Reverend Lu Feng suppressed his anger and asked, "You are Kuang Zhu?" Facing Daoist Master Liu Feng's question, which was filled with pressure and anger, Kuang Zhu answered calmly, "Yes, I am." "Since that's the case, hand over the other accomplices who murdered the 7 foundation building cultivators of my Gujian sect." Kuang Zhu showed a faint smile. It seemed that Daoist Master Lu Feng had come to handle this matter in his capacity as the sect master. Thereupon, he said, "No murder has occurred in Qianmen Ridge Station. May I know who the accomplice is that sect master Du is referring to?" Mo Tiange, who was standing on the side, was extremely astonished. Gujian sect's sect head actually came here in person. Apparently, today's matter couldn't be settled peacefully. Daoist Master Lu Feng was furious. "My Gujian sect had 7 foundation building cultivators in total in Qianmen Ridge Station. My sect's disciples personally saw 1 Han Gan and the other 4 foundation building cultivators perish right after they entered the main hall. The whereabouts of the other 2 foundation building cultivators are also unknown. Manager Kuang, how are you going to explain this matter to my Gujian sect?" Kuang Zhu still looked calm and elegant. Presumably, Gujian sect's disciples didn't report this matter clearly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to explain it to them. Then Kuang Zhu pointed at the main hall that had been razed to the ground and said, "This place used to be the main hall. Daoist Master Lu Feng, may I ask if you can sense what happened here?" The blood-refined aura of the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation wouldn't completely disperse in less than 3 to 5 months, so Daoist Master Liu Feng's expression changed after just a sweep of his divine sense. Kuang Zhu stopped smiling and asked, "If it weren't for my magic tool, which happened to be able to stop the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation from taking shape, and if it weren't for my junior martial sister who was good at arranging formations and using the formation's illusory beasts to kill the culprit, 1 Han Gan, inside the formation, sect head Du wouldn't have been able to collect the corpses of the other disciples of Gujian sect, let alone denouncing me." Before Daoist Master Lu Feng could answer, Kuang Zhu continued, "The disciples who launched the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation seem to be regarded as Gujian sect's traitors. Sect head Du, may I ask, during this chaotic demonic beast war, what should the disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups do when they appear in Kunwu Alliance's station? Not to mention that launching the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation required at least 3 blood mediums. Even if the formation master was lucky enough to survive, he would become a devil cultivator and his cultivation level would be greatly reduced. This formation was completely a formation that would perish together with the enemy." However, Kuang Zhu didn't talk about why Gujian sect's disciples launched the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation. Instead, he directly pointed to what happened after the 1,000 Shapes Azura formation was launched. No matter how much Daoist Master Lu Feng reprimanded him, Kuang Zhu had already pushed the dead disciples of Gujian sect to the opposite side of everyone in Qianmen Ridge Station, so Daoist Master Lu Feng couldn't make things difficult for him. Daoist Master Liu Feng's face turned from red to white, then from white to green. In the end, he said indignantly, you killed all the foundation-building disciples of my Gujian sect who participated in this matter, so you naturally wanted to silence them. I don't know what despicable method you used to actually lure my Gujian sect's disciples into using the Thousand Shapes Azura formation, but I won't be confused by your lies. Since I can't explain it clearly, I might as well fight. Once he said that, all the foundation-building disciples of Xianqing school took out their magic tools. Kuang Zhu was the only one who remained calm. Not to mention that it was sect head Du's disciples who broke the rules. Does sect head Du plan to kill all the disciples of the 7 great cultivation groups in Qianmen Ridge? Just as Daoist Master Lu Feng was about to say something, a magnificent voice accompanied by a frightening spiritual aura pressure came from afar. Sect head Du, you might as well kill me too. The nervous-looking Xianqing school disciples were instantly overjoyed. Some of them even shouted, "It's Grandmaster Jinghe." Before their shouts died down, a cloud chariot, surrounded by 8 foundation-building female cultivators wearing cloud-colored clothes and holding palace lanterns, was heading towards the gate of Qianmen Ridge Station at lightning speed. This ostentatious style of a fatuous ruler was naturally none other than Xianqing School's Lord Daoist Jinghe. After the incident, the 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talismans from both sides were sent at almost the same time. Compared to Xianqing School, Gujian sect was a bit further away from Qianmen Ridge, so Lord Daoist Jinghe should have set off right after he received the sound-transmitting talisman, but he only arrived now. Presumably, the speed of the cloud chariot was hindered by those female cultivators. Kuang Zhu's usually calm face seemed to be a bit gloomy as he watched the cloud chariot leisurely moving under the escort of female cultivators. The magnificent cloud chariot paid no attention to these people's gazes. The 8 female cultivators beside the cloud chariot were presumably also experienced people. They actually put away their palace lanterns with smiles on their faces and took out identical flower baskets from their chinkuan bags. Under everyone's gazes, they scattered fragrant flower petals from the air as if they were performing. When the flower petals completely covered the ground, the cloud chariot slowly landed on the ground. Everyone watched as 2 maids pulled up the gold-painted curtain in front of the cloud chariot. A middle-aged man wearing a golden crown and a king's robe, full of nobility, was sitting inside the cloud chariot, casually glancing at the people in front of him. Some people might have thought this cloud chariot was too ostentatious before, but now that they saw the master of the cloud chariot, they felt this ostentatious display wasn't excessive at all. In the end, Lord Daoist Jinghe stared at Master Lu Feng, who looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy, and smiled amiably. Your Gujian sect advocates the supremacy of force, but our Xianqing school is a Dao school. Dao schools naturally have to be reasonable. All the Xianqing school disciples were greatly embarrassed. Our Dao is the Dao of unity with the heavenly Dao, it's the Dao of balance. What does this have to do with reason? Besides, this Grandmaster Jinghe has always been a bloodthirsty person. When has he ever been reasonable? Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't wait for Master Lu Feng to answer. He turned to Yi Jingwen and said, "Jingwen brat, it'd be better if you tell me the whole story. I can also properly reason with sect head Du." Yi Jingwen first glanced at Kuang Zhu. Kuang Zhu nodded. Yi Jingwen then looked at Mo Tiange. Mo Tiange said, "Big brother Yi, just tell me the truth." Yi Jingwen naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to tell the truth, so he could only optimize the story they discussed. He cupped his hands and said, "Grandmaster, this matter has to start from when Junior Martial Sister Mo arrived at Qianmen Ridge Station." Lord Daoist Jinghe said carelessly, "There's no harm in telling me the details. A few days ago, Junior Martial Sister Mo, who went missing during the battle at Danding School, finally recovered from her injuries and found our Qianmen Ridge Station. Senior Martial Brother Kuang arranged a place for Junior Martial Sister Mo to rest and then assigned her a mission to leave the station. Because Junior Martial Sister Mo was new here and the demonic beast war in the past 2 years caused a lot of changes, Junior Martial Sister Mo decided to take a look around after she accepted the mission. Because of what happened that year, most people in the station didn't know Junior Martial Sister Mo. Moreover, I was also carrying out a mission outside and hadn't returned yet, so Junior Martial Sister Mo had no choice but to leave the station alone. Wan Honggan from Gujian sect took advantage of this, so he and 2 other early-stage foundation-building disciples from Gujian sect followed junior martial sister Mo out of the station with ill intentions. That day, I finished my mission and happened to be returning from outside the station. When I was about to reach the station, I suddenly sensed some people ganging up on Xianqing school cultivators. When I arrived, Wan Honggan and the others from Gujian sect bullied the major general and surrounded junior martial sister Mo. At first, Yi Jingwen still felt a bit guilty because he was lying, but now, because he was the one who was involved and Mo Tiange was merely his name, he was furious. Therefore, the more he spoke, the more vivid and the more resentful he became. He vividly described the ugliness of those people who wanted to molest junior martial sister Mo then kill her to seize her treasures. On the other side, Mo Tiange, whose head was hanging lower and lower, thought, "Senior martial brother Yi, these people who were ganged up on and beaten up like this have nothing to do with me." When he saw that everyone in the hall was starting to look angry, Yi Jingwen promptly adjusted the plot to the part where Mo Tiange fought back and, with his assistance, launched a desperate struggle against several cultivators from Gujian sect. Furthermore, Wan Honggan even sacrificed his fellow disciple and escaped back to their station. Yi Jingwen also clearly explained the matter of Wan Honggan sacrificing his fellow disciple and escaping back to their station. When he reached this point, Lord Daoist Jinghe's face was already filled with anger. According to Yi Jingwen's story, the several cultivators from Gujian sect who died in the main hall would probably also be portrayed as heinous criminals. Kuang Zhu was still quite afraid this grandmaster of his would start a massacre, so he interrupted Yi Jingwen and said, "I'll explain what happened next." Everyone heard Kuang Zhu's calm and elegant voice continue. After 2 of his fellow disciples died, this Wan Honggan came back and instigated several other Gujian sect disciples to come to the main hall and frame junior martial sister Mo. He even proposed that if junior martial sister Mo married him, he'd take responsibility for the deaths of his 2 fellow disciples in front of the elders of Gujian sect. Junior martial sister Mo was surrounded outside the station by him before, so she had a deep understanding of this person's maliciousness, so she naturally wouldn't believe his words. I believe everyone in Xianmen Ridge Station should also know that Wan Honggan's temperament isn't righteous. After his true colors were exposed by junior martial sister Mo, the senior martial brothers of Gujian sect naturally wouldn't help him when he abandoned his fellow disciples. This person saw that the matter was exposed and the deaths of his 2 fellow disciples would also be blamed on him, so he launched the Thousand Shapes Azura formation, intending to kill us and the senior martial brothers of Gujian sect in the main hall. When we just entered the main hall, several senior martial brothers of Gujian sect were too impulsive and started a small fight with us. Wan Honggan plotted to use them as blood mediums. If it wasn't because my medicinal cloud just happened to have the effect of preventing the Azura formation from taking shape, Qianmen Ridge Station would have been filled with resentful souls. It's just a pity that those senior martial brothers of Gujian sect died unjustly. Kuang Zhu heaved a long sigh, sounding very regretful. Ultimately, Yi Jingwen didn't plan on letting Wan Honggan go from the beginning, and Kuang Zhu wasn't a soft-hearted person either, so he deliberately used his words to infuriate the foundation-building cultivators of Gujian sect. However, the other cultivators of Gujian sect who died in the main hall did indeed die rather unjustly, so Kuang Zhu's words could be considered to have cleared their names. Lord Daoist Jinghe, who'd always been irascible, let out a cold humph after he heard the whole story. He raised his hand and blasted a big hole in the main hall that was razed to the ground by Wan Honggan's explosion. The remaining power greatly shocked everyone present. Some of the aura-refining disciples with slightly weaker cultivations even had blood trickling down the corners of their mouths. At the same time, Lord Daoist Jinghe said furiously, "Is my, Lord Daoist Jinghe's, last disciple someone you can casually take liberties with?" Mo Tiange raised her head in astonishment. She quickly glanced at Lord Daoist Jinghe then looked at Yi Jingwen. Yi Jingwen also looked at Mo Tiange with astonishment written all over his face. Although he already knew Mo Tiange was Lord Daoist Jinghe's registered disciple, the difference between last disciple and registered disciple was like the difference between heaven and earth. Registered disciples would at most pay attention to them when they remembered. Although they naturally had more benefits than ordinary disciples, they lacked a proper master to take care of them, so their cultivation path would be much more difficult. Becoming a last disciple wasn't as simple as becoming an official disciple. Most of the last disciples were also direct disciples because they felt it was enough to have such a disciple. The master would naturally focus on teaching the last disciple and would naturally give them all kinds of good things. With Lord Daoist Jinghe's words, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Mo Tiange had reached the sky in a single bound. At that moment, Lord Daoist Jinghe was facing the sect head of Gujian sect. He released his spiritual aura pressure and said angrily, "You actually wanted to use people's lives to force me to marry a female disciple of my sect? Even if you had several lives, it wouldn't be enough. Since the person is already dead, I won't start killing today. However, in the end, it's your Gujian sect that isn't strict. Du Lu Feng, go back and tell old Daoist Fuling that if he doesn't want me to kill my way to your sect, he has to give me a good explanation." Once he finished speaking, Lord Daoist Jinghe turned around and looked at Mo Tiange sternly. He called out, "Tiange." Although Mo Tiange was still shocked, she wouldn't hope this Lord Daoist could dispel her doubts in front of everyone. She hurriedly lowered her head and answered, "Disciple is here. This kind of unscrupulous and shameless person should die a quick death. 2 years ago, you even dared to lure a 5th-rank demonic beast by yourself, but you actually didn't dare to kill this kind of scoundrel on the spot. As my disciple, you're really shameful. Today, you should follow me back to the mountain for closed-door meditation." Although Lord Daoist Jinghe spoke harshly, he actually said, "Can't," as "don't dare." Moreover, he used the 5th-rank demonic beast as a bait, making people easily believe that Gujian's sect was being overbearing because Xianqing's school was being lenient. Compared to Yi Jingwen's cumbersome narration, Lord Daoist Jinghe's words were more convincing, and he was even more skillful in acting like a rogue. Soon after, Lord Daoist Jinghe reprimanded Yi Jingwen. "Yi Jingwen, you've been away from the mountain for some time, but you actually haven't made any progress. It's time for you to go back and listen to your master's teachings." After he finished speaking, he grabbed Mo Tiange and Mo Tiange into the cloud carriage. When the cloud carriage slowly rose into the sky, Lord Daoist Jinghe sneered and said, "This matter has been explained clearly, but sect head Du and your fellow martial brothers still haven't arrived. Presumably, they won't be able to make it. If sect head Du doesn't want to collect their corpses, you should hurry back to rescue them." Upon hearing what he said, Master Daoist Liufeng's expression changed greatly. He originally thought the bloodthirsty Lord Daoist Jinghe actually said something like, "I won't start a massacre today," and thought the heavens were looking after him. Who would have thought that Lord Daoist Jinghe had already vented his anger on the way here? They originally came to deal with the foundation building cultivators. If they lost a few core formation cultivators' lives because of this, Gujian's sect would probably end up as miserable as Danding School, whose foundation was destroyed by demonic beasts. Master Daoist Lufeng naturally didn't dare to linger. By the time Lord Daoist Jinghe finished speaking, he was already gone. After the cloud carriage rose into the sky, Lord Daoist Jinghe once again shouted, "Kuangzhu." Kuangzhu hurriedly answered, "Disciple is here. I'll give this to you as a reward. If those ignorant people from Gujian's sect come looking for us again, beat them up and kick them out. You can't be lenient." The female cultivator next to the cloud carriage took a medicine bowl from the carriage, then stepped on a flower basket and floated to Kuangzhu's side. After presenting the medicine bowl to Kuangzhu, she gracefully flew back to the side of the cloud carriage. Lord Daoist Jinghe's voice, which no longer contained any anger, came from inside the cloud carriage. "This bowl is called the Heaven Mixing Bowl, and the medicinal pestle inside it is called the Earth-Splitting Pestle. One for offense and the other for defense, they complement each other, and they can even strengthen the medicinal properties of spiritual plants. It's most suitable for you." Right after that, the female cultivator next to the cloud carriage took a dress from inside the carriage. Lord Daoist Jinghe said from inside the cloud carriage, "This 100 fragrances gorgeous dress is for your family Xiaobai. A girl should look like a girl. Is it interesting to dress like a man all day long? This lord hates this kind of thing the most. All the Xianqing school disciples widened their eyes when they heard what he said. In an instant, Zhanbai became the focus of everyone's attention. This time, everyone saw senior marshal brother Kuang Zhu's face, which had always been calm and collected, darkened. The female cultivator next to the cloud carriage gave the 100 fragrances gorgeous dress to Zhanbai, then left Qianmen Ridge Station with Lord Daoist Jinghe's cloud carriage. All the Xianqing school disciples watched as Grandmaster Jinghe left. They then turned their heads to look at Zhanbai again, but then they heard senior marshal brother Kuang Zhu, who wasn't very quiet, roar, "What are you looking at? All of you, go back." He then pulled Zhanbai away. Chapter 134. Mo Tiange stood inside the carriage, listening to the whistling sound of the wind. She kept her eyes on her nose and her nose on her heart, standing motionlessly and obediently. Yi Jingwen had also practiced this set of etiquette to the point of perfection, so he didn't make the slightest mistake. The two of them were like statues, perfectly embodying the image of obedient good disciples. Lord Daoist Jinghe stared at the two of them for a while. Seeing as neither of them had any intention of taking the initiative to explain anything, he slowly took out a cup of steaming hot tea. Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't know where he got this tea in his flying cloud carriage. Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen didn't make a sound, and Lord Daoist Jinghe didn't say anything either. There was only the steaming tea in the cloud carriage. Aside from the sound of Lord Daoist Jinghe drinking tea, there was no other sound. Lord Daoist Jinghe only breathed a sigh of contentment when the cup of tea was finished and threw it outside. Mo Tiange immediately thought that if there happened to be a cultivator below, would his head be smashed? But when she heard Grandmaster Jinghe's voice in the next second, she immediately collected her scattered thoughts. "I say." Lord Daoist Jinghe leaned against the back of the chair and stared at the two of them indifferently. "Do you really think I'm someone you can fool?" Although he didn't release his spiritual aura pressure, a drop of cold sweat dripped from Yi Jingwen's forehead. He knelt down and said, "Grand Disciple is incompetent. Please forgive us, Grandmaster." Mo Tiange's alarm clock was still full of Lord Daoist Jinghe's words about last disciple just now. She was still having some random thoughts, so she didn't think about this at all. However, when she saw Yi Jingwen's reaction, she immediately reacted and also knelt down with clenched teeth. Lord Daoist Jinghe snorted softly, then suddenly roared at the two kneeling people, "Little brats. Do you think I don't know anything? You really have guts. Not only did you kill 7 foundation building cultivators in one go, but you also hoped that I, your Grandmaster, would help you solve this matter. But now, you actually want to take advantage of me, your Grandmaster." As he roared angrily, the spiritual aura pressure of a nascent soul cultivator spread. Mo Tiange, who was originally reluctant, felt her whole body couldn't move when this spiritual aura pressure touched her. She was firmly pressed to the ground. Moreover, his forehead was drenched in cold sweat, and the spiritual energy in his body was surging. He was actually unable to control it. However, in the next moment, they heard Lord Daoist Jinghe's light voice again. "But in the end, you're my disciple, Lord Daoist Jinghe. How could I let people come knocking on my door at will?" His tone was full of complacency and complacency. Mo Tiange was stunned. What kind of play is this? She thought even though Lord Daoist Jinghe was proud of himself, he'd still publicly reprimand them then give them rewards. She never expected him to be so direct. Yi Jingwen was the first to react. He immediately said, "Grandmaster is right. Grand Disciple also thinks so. These Gujian sect cultivators were really shameless. How could they let them bully them? However, we also can't let those old men of Gujian sect ruin Grandmaster's reputation, so Grand Disciples and the others decided to act on their own." These words made Mo Tiange sweat once again. She had just realized Big Brother Yi was quite long-winded, but she never knew Yi Jingwen could actually be so flowery. Not only did he push all the blame away, but he also made it sound like they were thinking about Grandmaster. Lord Daoist Jinghe, on the other hand, enjoyed it very much. He laughed heartily while stroking his short beard. Not bad, not bad. You're quite clever. Although I know you're not telling the truth, I like you, so I won't argue with you. Yi Jingwen heaved a sigh of relief, and Mo Tianga's body also felt lighter. He had finally passed this stage, but the two of them shuddered again. They saw Lord Daoist Jinghe looking at them with a profound gaze. This matter of yours is to my liking, but you're too daring. In order to stop others from talking, from today onwards, you'll be in seclusion at Clear Spring Peak for 10 years. Within 10 years, you're not allowed to go out without orders. Do you hear me? They weren't allowed to leave Mount Taikong for 10 years, so under Grandmaster Jinghe's protection, outsiders naturally wouldn't dare to do anything to them. Grandmaster Jinghe was deliberately letting them off. Both Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen were delighted. They glanced at each other, then prostrated on the ground with sincerity. Thank you, Grandmaster. Yes. Lord Daoist Jinghe's eyes were still closed, but he raised one of his eyes and cast a glance at Mo Tiange. Why are you still calling me Grandmaster? Mo Tiange was stunned. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. What's wrong with that? Lord Daoist Jinghe snorted. Do you think my words are all farts? Since you're my last disciple, you naturally don't need to address me like that. Huh? Mo Tiange was really dumbfounded this time. She just thought Grandmaster Jinghe said it as a stopgap measure for other people to hear. Did he really think she was his last disciple? What, huh? Lord Daoist Jinghe glanced at her. His words were full of intimidation. Don't tell me you still don't want to be my disciple? Mo Tiange blinked. Before she could come back to her senses, Yi Jingwen bumped into her and whispered, Why are you in a daze? Quickly kowtow. Mo Tiange kowtowed in panic. Disciple. Disciple kowtows in salute to master. What was this? She had seen deification cultivators before, so she wouldn't be scared to death by Grandmaster Jinghe. However, she really couldn't adapt to the way this Grandmaster handled things, Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded with satisfaction. That's more like it. Master is very unhappy now, so there's no master-disciple ceremony. Do you have any objections? No. Did she dare to have any objections? She was merely a foundation-building cultivator without any foundation, yet she could be accepted as the last disciple of a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. What kind of glory was that? Even core formation cultivators would fight to the death for it. How could she have any objections? She was just a bit worried. This Grandmaster had a strange character and wasn't easy to get along with. Mo Tiange's heart was in turmoil. Before she could figure out what was going on, she heard Lord Daoist Jinghe's humph. At that moment, Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen trembled, feeling a strong spiritual aura pressure. Mo Tiange was now very experienced. As soon as this spiritual aura pressure appeared, she knew it should be the spiritual aura pressure of a nascent soul cultivator. Another nascent soul cultivator actually appeared? At that moment, Lord Daoist Jinghe raised the corners of his lips and snorted coldly. You want to pressure me with this little trick? With a wave of his sleeve, a barrier appeared out of thin air, protecting the cloud carriage so that not even a drop of water could leak through. Right after that, he clasped his hands together, and an astonishing momentum appeared. Unexpectedly, Mo Tiange and Yi Jingwen were still in the foundation-building realm inside the carriage, and they were also very close to Lord Daoist Jinghe. Once Lord Daoist Jinghe used this move, the two of them instantly vomited blood and fainted inside the carriage. Lord Daoist Jinghe frowned. This was the first time his carriage encountered an enemy with someone inside, so he actually overlooked this point. Lord Daoist Jinghe muttered in a very bad mood, really useless. Right after he said that, he stopped the cloud carriage, lifted the gold-lined curtain, and went out. When Mo Tiange woke up, she felt as if her body was trapped in a cloud. She couldn't exert force in any part of her body, she couldn't even open her eyes, and her meridians were also aching faintly. Just as Mo Tiange was about to move, she heard a woman's voice saying softly, Martial Uncle Mo, this is Grandmaster's Wenyang Pool. Just now, we encountered an enemy on the road, and Grandmaster accidentally injured you. When Grandmaster came back, he brought you here and told us to take good care of you. Martial Uncle, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Mo Tiange thought to herself, my whole body feels uncomfortable, but it's hard for me to even speak. Soon after, another woman's voice said, Mengzhu, Martial Uncle woke up. Help Martial Uncle take the medicinal pills Grandmaster left behind. Mo Tiange felt someone passing a medicinal pill to her lips. It took her a lot of effort to open her mouth, but she found she didn't even have the strength to swallow. The previous woman said, Martial Uncle, I'm sorry. Then someone pinched her lower jaw and forced the medicinal pill into her body. Once the medicinal pill entered her body, its medicinal power spread along her meridians, and her aching meridians felt a lot more comfortable. However, the medicinal effect couldn't be compared to the medicinal herbs gathered by the Inferno beast in the virtual sky world. Mo Tiange frowned. While she was doing her best to absorb the medicinal power, she felt extremely unlucky. In the battle of demonic beasts, she had to provoke a 5th-rank demonic beast. If it wasn't for her 5 spirits cultivation body in her virtual sky world, she would have died a long time ago. She finally healed with great difficulty and met up with her fellow disciples, but then she encountered Big Brother Yi being ganged up on. Because of this incident, she was accepted as an advanced inner disciple by a nascent soul grandmaster. Who would have thought that before the title of advanced inner disciple could warm up, she would be seriously injured by her own master? How many advanced inner disciples in this world would be seriously injured by their own master right after they accepted him as a disciple? In all of West Kunwu, Mo Tiange was probably the only one who was a weirdo. She really didn't know what kind of fate she had. After thinking about this, Mo Tiange finally felt she had some strength. She struggled to ask, is Big Brother Yi alright? Martial Uncle, Senior Martial Brother Yi has been taken back to Clear Spring Peak by Martial Uncle Qingyuan to heal his injuries. Grandmaster has already given him medicinal pills, so presumably, he should be fine. Given. You're obviously the one who injured him, yet you still gave him. Mo Tiange felt very helpless when she felt the circle of people surrounding her. If she was still a registered disciple, she would have definitely been left to fend for herself. That way, she could enter the virtual sky world to heal her injuries. Whether it was medicinal plants or spiritual aura, it was many times better than the rewards bestowed by this master. With this thought in mind, Mo Tiange felt a lot better. In all of West Kunwu, she was probably the only one who dared to disdain the rewards bestowed by a middle-stage nascent soul master. However, Big Brother Yi was probably in a miserable state this time. Not to mention the damage to his meridians, his cultivation level might even regress. She didn't know whether she was the one who got him into trouble or whether she was the one who got into trouble with him. As she thought up to this point, Mo Tiange suddenly remembered another matter. Why are you guys fine? Mo Tiange remembered that the several female cultivators outside the cloud carriage were also in the foundation building realm like her. How could they still have the ability to take care of her when she and Yi Jingguan were seriously injured? Reporting to Uncle Master, the 8 of us are protected by the formation that comes with the cloud carriage, so no matter how earth-shattering the battle between Grandmaster and others is, it won't affect us. However, Grandmaster is usually the only one in the cloud carriage, and Uncle Master and Senior Brother Yi are close to each other. That's why we're implicated. Before Mo Tiange could slander them, she heard the female voice say, riding in the same carriage with Grandmaster is such a rare honor. If word of this spread, countless fellow disciples would be envious of us. Moreover, Grandmaster really didn't do it on purpose, so I hope Martial Uncle won't take it to heart. Mo Tiange thought to herself, you guys ride the same carriage every day, but I don't see how many people would be envious of you. However, she heard a slightly sarcastic female voice say, Senior Martial Sister Mengzhu, I'm afraid it's not up to you to explain whether Martial Uncle takes it to heart or not. Such an impolite tone made Mo Tiange a bit dumbfounded. What's going on? At that moment, the female cultivator called Mengzhu changed her gentle tone and snorted coldly. I'm talking to Martial Uncle Mo. Why do you need to interrupt? The female cultivator who ridiculed Mengzhu became even more annoyed when she heard her reply. She sneered and said, Grandmaster told us to serve Martial Uncle Mo together, not just Senior Martial Sister. Why can't I interrupt? Junior Martial Sister Rulan. Mengzhu's voice suddenly became a lot stricter. Are you the Senior Martial Sister or am I the Senior Martial Sister? You, Rulan paused for a moment then said reluctantly, Of course you're the Senior Martial Sister. Mengzhu's slightly arrogant voice once again returned. Since I'm the Senior Martial Sister, it's naturally up to me to speak. After she said that, the scene became quiet for a while. The woman called Rulan once again said angrily, Even if you're the Senior Martial Sister now, so what? Who Grandmaster likes doesn't depend on the ranking. After listening up to this point, Mo Tiange finally understood. Could this be the legendary fight for a man's affection? Thinking about that unreliable Grandmaster Jinghe, he was now her master, as well as these beautiful female cultivators who were probably no more than 100 years old, she felt a chill run down her spine. Dao schools promoted purity of heart and few desires. Although dual cultivation was prohibited, very few of them liked to take concubines. Could it be that her new master was an exception? Mengzhu, Rulan, these names were really vulgar. Grandmaster Jinghe, who considered himself to be extraordinary, noble, and graceful, actually liked this kind of name. Would there be a plum or a chrysanthemum next? Just as this thought crossed her mind, she heard Mengzhu call out, Shuangju, what's with your expression? Mo Tiange almost vomited blood. Unfortunately, she didn't have any strength now. She could only keep a distorted expression on her face while doing her best to absorb the medicinal power so that she could regain control of her body as soon as possible. At the same time, she continued to listen to these female cultivators' verbal attacks. Senior Martial Sister Mengzhu, I didn't say anything. Shuangju's voice was cold. It seemed she didn't want to get involved. Mengzhu sneered. You didn't say anything, but it's written all over your face. Shuangju didn't answer and remained silent for a while. Rulan laughed contemptuously and said, Senior Martial Sister Mengzhu, in terms of ranking, you're not the eldest. Why did you have to bully Shuangju? When did I bully her? Unconvinced, Mengzhu argued, I only asked her a question. What does she mean by ignoring me? Enough. Once Rulan spoke, the female cultivator who rarely spoke said in a dignified manner, If I don't speak, you'll really think I'm just a decoration. What's the use of arguing about this? Grandmaster told us to take care of Martial Uncle Mo. Aren't you afraid Martial Uncle Mo will take offense at your words? Once she said that, everyone became silent for a while. Shuangju said, Senior Martial Sister Mame, don't be angry. We'll stop talking. But right after she said that, Rulan continued to say, Senior Martial Sister Mame, you're so attentive in taking care of Martial Uncle Mo. Don't tell me you want to use Martial Uncle Mo to curry favor with Grandmaster. I'm just afraid you've miscalculated. Upon hearing that, Mo Tiange felt even more helpless. These people quarreled in front of her. Although they called her Martial Uncle, they didn't show any respect. Weren't they just bullying her because she was a foundation-building cultivator? Lord Daoist Jinghe's way of controlling his subordinates really wasn't good. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.